to be inspired by him. So with that, I turn it over to Rabbi Jacobson, and everybody sit back, enjoy, and let's enjoy tonight's Farbrengen. Amen. Yontev. L'chaim u'levracha. Tonight, and 24th anniversary of the liberation of the man, the great giant known as the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. The year 1798, the Hebrew year Tov Kuf Nun Tes, he was arrested on the 25th of Tishrei, 2 days after Simchas Torah, for so-called counter-revolutionary activity. And 53 days later, he was released from Tsarist prison. And ever since, this has become known as the Chag HaGeula, a holiday of redemption and liberation. So they say that in the name of the Alter Rebbe, that when you're asked a question and you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. So we're going to do all three and hopefully cover all the bases. So as the custom is, as I personally witnessed, I sat at the feet of a successor of the Alter Rebbe, 7 generations afterwards. The Rebbe, as he's known. And the Farbrengen and Yud Tes Kislev, like tonight, we would always begin with a classic song, which is attributed and was composed around this day, Poda B'Shalom Nafshi, which means, my soul was redeemed in peace. It's a verse from the book of Psalms. And the Alter Rebbe says that when he was told the news that he was going to be released, he was in the middle of saying that section in the book of Psalms. So let us all begin with the Niggun, Poda B'Shalom Nafshi song, and maybe that'll answer all the questions, and I'll have a short night. So we have our schus and merit. Let's together sing Poda B'Shalom Nafshi, please.
Keep it up.
Sitting together, as diverse as we may be, each of us with our own personalities and unique persuasions and opinions, sometimes different opinions, but they come together what we call the harmony within diversity. That's what a Farbrengen is. It's the difference between a Farbrengen and a party and a speech. In a speech, one person speaks and most aren't listening. Yeah, I can talk from experience. At a party, everybody's speaking and nobody's listening. And if I bring in, nobody's speaking but everybody's listening. But you need to have one person up there to at least feign some talk. But the real, I can tell you as a speaker, speaking is listening, absorbing, in a sense, trying to get the vibes of what resonates with all of us, human condition, as a Jewish people, the things we've gone through in life, in our lives now, throughout our history. So there are things that are not always spoken, and that's what you try to express. So Good Farbrengen is no real speaker. We're all listening in one way or another, including myself. So, from personal experience, I can tell you one of the great challenges I face is due to the fact that I am a writer and a speaker, and I travel to many different circles, and not all are captive audiences. I'm not sure whether you are either, but there's some people who would walk into a Chabad house, or a synagogue, or a JCC, for whatever reason. Maybe you know such people, maybe you don't. And so I have the fortune, and also the challenge, of being in such environments where, after my book Torah Meaningful Life was published, so I went to bookstores. I had no idea what this was. It was a book tour. I don't think they do that anymore, especially after COVID. And I traveled across the country, going to these bookstores, and there you meet people who didn't even necessarily come to hear you. They may have come to get a coffee or to buy an auto repair manual. But it thrust me into a situation where now I was encountering people that not necessarily gathered together on Yud Tes Kislev or for any other occasion to hear something like that. They couldn't take that for granted. So it caused me to have to do something which is go out of your comfort zone and explain ideas that many people find foreign. To the point, I remember I was in Cleveland, so it was a morning show that they had new featured authors. Like a 6-minute interview, you have a live interview. And when I walk into the studio, and the anchor person comes to greet me, and as she looked at me, I saw, recoiled, almost in horror. I thought, I don't know, what did I do? And she looked at me and I said, are you all right? She says, I love your book. I have it at my night table, but I never expected that the author would look like you. So I said, why, is something wrong with my look? I said, what do you expect? She said, I expected a 6'2", clean-shaven guy with a lot of hair in his head, cool type of guy. So I said to her, I thought I was that, not clean-shaven. Okay, 2 out of the 3. Anyway, so I said, and I wasn't offended, I actually found it amusing. So I said to her, why don't we talk about that? When we sit down on the couch, interview. She said, I'm not going to say that, I can't, So I said, say it. So that's what we did. We sat down and she said to me, live TV in the morning, Cleveland, and who could be listening and watching? She said, I love your book. It's so personal and relevant. But wouldn't your message be more received better if you looked like one of us? That was her question. So, if they're going to dish it out, then you have to also take it. So I said, well, I don't know if you'd ask that question if I was a Saudi Arabian prince, or someone from a different culture. They probably would fire you for asking that, right? You can get away with a Jew. I said it with a smile. It came across fine. And I said, isn't this an opportunity for us to get beyond stereotypes and external looks and talk soul to soul? I would never expect you to change how you dress, how you look. You're comfortable in your own skin, aren't you? So this is the whole point. We are so superficial. Everything is the image and looks. Why don't we talk heart to heart? That's the whole point of my book. That's the whole point of Judaism. The whole point of Torah is to not be consumed with these externals. And we had an excellent conversation. She was delighted. It really came across really well. The point I'm making is that very often when we communicate, we usually communicate with people that are like-minded. Or at least we like to be around people that are like-minded. And when you're challenged as someone who's not of your own background or education or belief system, many of us either get flustered or we avoid it or we become judgmental. So I stand here for Farbrengen of Yud Tes Kislev. I know you all come here for that reason. You didn't come here, this was right, truth in advertising. You didn't come for another purpose. Is that correct? Just checking with the rabbi. So we can take for granted, what is Yud Tes Kislev? Why is this so significant? I wouldn't take it, because I grew up with it. My whole life I was around it. That's what I was taught. I didn't even think about it. But that's not necessarily the healthiest way to approach any subject. Because you have to be able to answer the big question, why are we spending our time here this evening? There are other things we can do. Why is this Yud Tes Kislev? 224 years. Fine. A great rabbi, a great man was released from prison. That was then. It's a long time ago. There are no czars in Russia any longer. There are other issues, but not czars. And even if it's important for the family or community of Chabad, because this is the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Chassidus, why is it relevant to anyone who, let's say, does not necessarily call themselves Chabadnik, or, for that matter, someone isn't even Jewish? So I want to answer that question. I think it's appropriate to address it in that context instead of just, so to speak, preaching to the converted. And I'll do it with, share two stories. I would even define them as life-defining moments in my own life that taught me to appreciate and really value what did the Alter Rebbe come to contribute. Because that's the big question. How would the world be different if the Alter Rebbe was not born, or he was not liberated from prison, God forbid? Now, people don't ask that question about Albert Einstein, or even Bob Dylan. When you look at the end of the millennium, if you remember the top 100 people in the last millennia, the Jews were Freud, Marx, Einstein, and Bob Dylan. A few other Jews as well thrown in there. But you don't find the Alter Rebbe there, or the Rebbe, or many others. So it's like two universes. So is it only important for people who know about it, and everybody's a big best kept secret that 8 billion people on this earth don't know about it? So I'd like to share a few thoughts on this, the stories I'm going to share, that demonstrate the contribution not just to Chabad and not just to Jewish people, but to the entire world. And yes, we still have work to be done because most people do not know of these contributions. But when you hear them, they are revolutionary for us individually, communally, and yes, globally. So story number one. Story number one happened in Santa Cruz, California. Any of you have ever been to Santa Cruz? Oh, wow. Usually it's 1 or 2 people. So you'll recognize the description. So I went to Santa Cruz a number of years ago. Just for those that don't know where it is, it's an hour south of San Francisco, situated between the Pacific mountains. It has its own unique climate. Very serene place. Called a very spiritual type of place. So I was scheduled to speak in the evening in a bookstore called Gateways. Not the Jewish Gateways. It was a New Age bookstore. On Main Street or Central Avenue, one of those two names. You know, from New York, every city has a Main Street, but there's no Main Street in New York. But I can tell you that this city, Santa Cruz, is like antithetical in every possible way. Even though my parents are Russian born, I'm a New Yorker, I hope in a good, positive way. Probably many of you are. Florida is not just second New York. Like, for example, in Santa Cruz, no one seems to have a job. Nobody's rushing anywhere. Everyone's very calm. I remember a bunch of young men and women hanging around, and I said, "What's going on?" They said, "They're just in bliss." I didn't ask whether it was natural or through substances. But it was a very calm, serene environment. Give you the context. And I could see on the faces in the evening we gathered to the bookstore, big crowd showed up, very, very informal. Carpet, people sitting on the floor. I was very comfortable. I like the informal. I felt that it wasn't a place I have to get into a whole debate about God and right and wrong. People were spiritually inclined. And I could tell there were a lot of Jews in the room as well. You want to know how? There's a thing called a Jewish nose. One second, I'm not anti-Semitic, just make sure. Some of my best friends are Jews. Now, a nose could be two ways. It could be a Jewish nose, it could be a nose job. So, but let's not digress. Rabbi Booker feels like, where am I going, right? I'm talking about your Tes Kislev. Just informal fashion. Anyway, I gave my talk. After my talk, was questions and answers. A woman gets up in the back of the room and she asks the following question. She says, I was born in Borough Park, Brooklyn, New York. You know this place? What? You're all from Borough Park? Huh? Oh, okay. So this is a bastion of what the New York Times would call ultra-Orthodox Jews. You can't call it a cult because I think they could be sued, so they call it a sect. Which is like... and I grew up there. I went to Beis Yaakov schools. Very observant, and I could tell she also, I saw from her tone that she spoke Yiddish. And she says, I grew up in a home of Holocaust survivors, both my parents. They were very angry, a lot of guilt. Everything was very negative in our home. My father was an angry man, my mother was even angrier. And that was the Judaism I grew up with. It was all about guilt and punitiveness and God's punishments and fear. But I was a very curious girl, so in school I would ask questions. And every time I asked questions, I was silenced. I was told, just be a good Yiddish Mädel, a good Jewish girl, like your mother and grandmother, stop asking so many questions, stop disrupting. And I didn't have any malicious intentions. It was coming from a very sincere place. I was really curious. And I was continuously shut down. At some point, I think she said when she was 17 years old, she said enough is enough. The word she used, I'll never forget. She said my soul was asphyxiated. Asphyxiated. I felt that I couldn't breathe. So I decided to pack my bags one night and I left, never to return. I went to the West Coast, to LA. The way she described it sounded like the late 60s. And then from there I moved up to the Haight-Ashbury scene in San Francisco. And then finally settled here in Santa Cruz, and I found my peace. She said, I found my God. I don't want to sound irreverent here. Can I say exactly what she said? Okay. Will I ever be invited again? It's not so bad. Just, she said, I found my God in Zen Buddhism. And in a thing, well, just out of respect for the sanctuary here, a thing that is not an acronym for Let's Start Davening. Let's put it that way. You want to figure it out? LSD. Okay? Those that don't know what it is, Chabad lechem bro. May you be blessed. A full disclaimer, I've never tried it, and it's not my thing, but I know about it because I meet many people that discovered God through. And that's where I found my God. Not in Judaism. And she said it in a refined way. She was not trying to be in any way antagonistic. And here you are standing, this is what she said, here you are standing with a beard and a yarmulke. You look like the rabbis that I had in Beis Yaakov. And you speak about God and spirituality and soul in such a comfortable way. Where did you get this from? It's not the Judaism I grew up with. I haven't seen a rabbi like you in years. And I saw in the faces of others that others had similar questions. So I replied and I said, Well, we Jews have a thing called the 613-step program. It was pared down over the years by some. And she smiled, and she said, okay, I understand. Anyway, the evening wasn't over. As people dispersed, she remained with maybe another 11 or 12 people. And we had this long marathon conversation into the night. The store closed, I think, 1 a.m. So we went outside. It was a beautiful evening. We sat on the park bench. And we talked about everything. You know, one of those college nights about God and purpose and good and evil and the Holocaust and good people suffering. I mean, you name it. We went into for hours. And I shared with her, and this is the first time, well, I can't say the first time, but in such a pronounced way, where I saw what the Alter Rebbe and Chassidus came to contribute. You know, when you're challenged, that's when you have to dig deeper. You can't just assume things. And I said to her, I am not in any way going to judge you for what you did 30 whatever years ago when you left home. And as she put it, my parents probably sat shiva for me. Because I don't know what I would have done if my soul was asphyxiated and suffocated. So I'm not here to talk about that. But I will tell you that what you rejected was only half the story. They never told you the other half of the story. And I shared with her the following parable, which frankly I don't even know where it comes from. Maybe some of you know. I've been looking for it. I don't want to believe I made it up, but maybe I did. I don't know. You know, you forget over the years. It's not believing your own stories, you know. But no, I never suggested this actually happened, but it's a beautiful parable. The parable is that when God created the world, He created the world, obviously with many beautiful species, and one of them was the nightingale. The nightingale is a bird that has an exquisite voice. And the nightingale comes to Hashem, to God, and says, thank you so much, God, for giving me a beautiful voice, but I have a problem. I may be perched on the branch one dusk, serenading into the night, and everyone's loving my melody, but there's one hungry predator looking for a meal. And who are they going to be attracted to? To meat. Piece of meat. So God, give me something to protect myself from my enemies. So God offers the bird a beak, a sharp beak, which is a form of defense. So the beak is like a razor-sharp beak. The bird inspects the merchandise and says to God, a beautiful bird like me with a nose like that. Okay, so fine. God then offers the bird claws, sharp claws, yet another form of protection. And here too the bird rejects it for the same reason. It's not becoming, it's not able enough, it's not refined enough for a bird like me. So finally God says to the bird, okay, this is it. I'm going to give you a set of wings. Wings. And the bird looks at the wings, never saw wings before, and says to God, I don't understand. You're the master of the universe. You created the world with such wisdom and design. I have enough body weight with me. You give me 2 extra pieces of dead weight. That will just make it more cumbersome and more difficult for me to escape my enemies. What are you giving me these 2 pieces of flesh? And God, of course, says, no, little bird. These are called wings. And when you use them, they will allow you to soar, to fly, to reach places that you can never reach on your own. You can escape any predator that comes your way. So I said to this woman and to the small group of people we were talking on the Santa Cruz park bench, he said, you know, Judaism, at face value, had a lot of obligations, a lot of body weight. And the more you learn, the more you realize how much it is. It gets, you know, heavier and heavier. Besides the 613 mitzvahs, each one breaks down into many more details. I mean, just look at Pesach, Passover. Some call it the ultimate OCD holiday, for those that have that issue. Every crumb, every detail, what you eat, how you don't, everything. So when you look at it, it's a lot of body weight. Why would we need that? Yes, we understand there's certain principles in Judaism everyone can agree are so beautiful. Love your fellow, kindness, virtue, charity, tzedakah. But so many others, so many details. Here, B'Lehem Torah mitzvahs, it says that abundant, many, many mitzvahs. However, that's one half of the story. The other half is that these mitzvahs are wings. So yes, a bird with wings will weigh more than a bird without. But there's no bird on earth, even a bird on a diet. There are no birds on diet, just for the record. It's only a human thing. Will reject wings. Why? Because it's not the weight. You realize the weight is meaningless. What the wings can do for you, things you can't get in any other place, any other way. The word mitzvahs is translated by most commandments. But the real meaning of it, as the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaGeula of today, Yud Tes Kislev, tells us that mitzvahs come from the word connection. Tzavsa v'chibur. Think about it, commandment or connection? Most people don't like to be commanded. Everybody wants to be connected. Whether it's networking or it's telecommunications or whatever it may be. Connections, networks. A mitzvah is a connection. Immediately, intriguingly, makes us wonder, what are you connecting to? You're connecting to your better angels. You're connecting to the real quintessential you, what you're capable of being. And it's like wings that will allow you to soar to places and experience transcendence, which we cannot do when we're grounded by the gravitational tug and pull of this material world. And that they didn't teach you, unfortunately. Let me tell you exactly what happened next. The woman began to cry, as did others at the bench, as did I as well. So we had this sobbing session, but a healthy one. We weren't crying over pain and suffering. We weren't crying over loss or grief. It was that existential cry when you realize a deeper truth and you're like standing in awe of it. And she didn't even have to say any words. But then afterwards, I felt the need to tell her, I said, this is not my idea that I'm sharing with you. This is what I grew up with. I was blessed to learn not just about obligations, the weight of Judaism, and there is weight. But I also learned about the wings. As the Rebbe would say often in Farbrengen, he would say, if someone offers you 100 pounds of stones, carry across the room and it belongs to you. Most of us would reject it. Who needs stones? Rocks. But if someone said 100 pounds of diamonds, you'd say, give me 200 pounds. Now 100 pounds of diamonds don't weigh less than 100 pounds of stones. As we all know the joke about the feathers and so on. But you don't think about the weight. You think about the value. And it overshadows the effort. It's not like people are concerned with effort or working hard. They see that it's wings that allow you to fly to places you couldn't reach. It's a whole different way of looking at life. So in this anecdote, this parable, this story I share with you, though there's no way you can capture one story, a man like the Alter Rebbe and the Geula of Yud Tes Kislev, but it does capture the revolution that he created that really is underappreciated, even by those closest to the Alter Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe's teachings. Because what he was doing was not just teaching the observant world, which was the majority in his time, the Alter Rebbe's time, but he was teaching everyone that what God has to offer in the Torah and the mitzvahs are wings that allow you to reach places you can never reach on your own. You can make all the money in the world, you can be successful, whatever success means, but to experience that level of transcendence, you need wings. And yes, there is a price to pay. There are obligations, there are commitments. But they're not about commandments, they're about connections. And you connect to the real you, to the higher you, to the you that you're capable of becoming not just to the you think you are. Henry Kissinger writes in his book, when he writes about when Nixon, in the year he resigned, 74, 73, Watergate. Hey, you're all too young to remember, I guess. Right? Well, it doesn't matter. The point is, so the night that he resigned, so Kissinger was with him, he asked him to pray with him, the whole story. And then Kissinger says, went over to that painting, the famous painting in the White House, where JFK is sitting in the repose mode. And JFK, of course, was Camelot. I mean, despite what we know about other things going on. And Nixon whispered to the painting, and he said, they love you, JFK that is, because you remind them of what they want to be. And they hate me because I remind them of who they are. Well, pretty interesting insight. So, I'll say, what the Alter Rebbe did was teach people nothing new. It's not like Torah didn't say it before, but it can get obscured or lost in the shuffle, especially after everything the Jews were enduring during those difficult times. To not just be who you think you are, but what you're capable of becoming. Those people in your life that have changed you in some way, a mentor, all come down to one common thing. They saw something in you that you didn't even see, and believed in you. And that allowed you the freedom, the courage to be able to become something far greater, to find your wings and soar. And it's sad because this woman in Santa Cruz captured thousands, if not millions of people in today's society. Everyone has their own story. And so many who've disappointed with Judaism or never understood it in the first place. But when you hear this in this context, this is what Hasidus call this Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. This is one of the major things that Hasidus teaches. It's not anything new, because all of Judaism and all of Torah is based on this principle. But to discover those wings and not just see all the obligations as commandments and burdens. And yes, I'll do it because culturally it's accepted. My grandparents will be upset if I don't go to shul on Yom Kippur. But to actually go to shul, or to celebrate a mitzvah, or to celebrate a prayer, or to celebrate a Shabbos, and actually feel how you're soaring, that's what the Chassidus teaches us how to do. And this is something that can be taught to anyone. I can tell you, I've shared this idea with communities and people who don't have any connection, and some not even Jewish. When you hear this, you say, wow, that's something. Now this doesn't mean that we have a monopoly on it. There are many individuals and books and writers that talk about this idea. But at the end of the day, we have a history of almost 4,000 years celebrating. Do you think the Jewish people are here by accident? Because they knew the secret of soaring. That even in the most difficult, tough times, that we went through everything, we knew how to find those wings and in some way not be defined by those that hated us and not be defined by the circumstances of life. We're able to rise above it, just like a bird flies in the skies, even though there may be a storm brewing below. So I want to say l'chaim to the Alter Rebbe, l'chaim to all the Rabbeim. Okay? There we are. L'chaim to each one of you, to not just who you are, but what you can become. May Yud Tes Kislev, this special day, empower us all. And the Alter Rebbe gave his life for this. And sat 53 days, and we'll talk more about that. To become and actualize our greatest potential, find those wings, and soar. Sing a nigga, and then we'll continue.
The Alter Rebbe's women, and sing along. Hey.
This story happened in Huntington, New York. Yeah, we're moving to the East Coast. Torah College has a law school there. And I was invited to be on a panel with two rabbis and myself. You'll see from the story why I don't like to call myself a rabbi. I don't mean it. That was... And the theme of the evening was discussing principles of Jewish faith, namely Mashiach and Geula, or Messiah and redemption. So a moderator asked each of us questions. And just to give you the titles without names, so there's no Lashon Hara in this story. Orthodox rabbi, a conservative rabbi, and myself. Yeah, it sounds like, right. You know, a Frenchman, a Russian, and a Jew go into a bar. And the bartender says, "What is this, a joke?" Something like that. So, after the questions, so here too, the excitement always happens in the parts that are not scripted. And there's a big audience, say there's quite a serious audience. And here too, to tell you the way it is, a woman asked the question. Why the women are the ones that ask the best questions? That we can discuss another time. Okay? And because the men think they have all the answers. No. And she said the following. The younger woman in her 20s, she said, all of your three experts were very eloquent in presenting the importance of the final redemption, that the world will come to a better place, world peace, eradication of famine and war, peace, a world where filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Beautiful. But I want to speak now on behalf of the largest segment of the Jewish population, the unaffiliated. What will happen with us? We're Jewish. Some of us don't know what it means. Our only connection is to anti-Semitism or Israel. Some of us go to synagogue, many don't. We struggle with that identity. What will happen to us if Mashiach comes tonight? What will happen with us tomorrow morning? And I remember sitting there at the podium with the other two rabbis. And I said, oh, that's going to be interesting here. You know, I've heard many questions. And it's one I never heard before. And thank God I was the third in line to answer. Not that I had something to say yet, but it was... So the first to speak was the Orthodox rabbi, and I said, since there's no names here, there's no potential slander or gossip or Lashon Hara or whatever you want to call it. And he said 4 words, the rabbi. He said, God will have mercy. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard like 700 people boo somebody, but it's not very pleasant, because you see boo has a certain synchronicity to it. You know, when everybody boos together, it's like applause with the opposite. Maybe we could try it now, but it won't look good. So, if I say something that deserves it, then we'll do that. So they booed him for obvious reasons. First of all, he didn't answer the question. And second of all, what he said was a little condescending, frankly. Okay, fine. The next is the conservative rabbi. He turns to me. He says, you know, that's a great question, Rabbi Jacobson. What is that? What will happen? And then poured fuel on the fire and continued, and his voice was dripping with cynicism. A really good guy. I mean, on the panel, We actually, I should have mentioned this, we all had a very good conversation. I mean, didn't have many disagreements, and it was very interesting. But his voice was dripping with cynicism as he said the following words, which were like chilling. He said, and this I won't say in the name of the person he said it. He said, I heard from the name of a tzaddik, a righteous person from the previous generation that said that the Holocaust happened because of the sins of the Jewish people in Germany and Central Europe and so on. Well, that's not enough, he added. And he went on to speak about every crime perpetrated by the Nazis against the Jews. How it was tit for tat, midah connected midah, tit for tat for the different crimes. The children, the women, the men. I'm not going to repeat what was said. The place was like mortified. I mean, this is what he was like. And he was not saying his name. He says, I heard this from this tzaddik. So is that going to happen if Mashiach comes tonight to the secular or non-observant world? In other words, another Holocaust. So you can imagine the room was like electric, but not in a positive way. The place was, the tension in the air. And here is now my turn. It's not exactly like neutral. And these two rabbis really did not do, what shall I say? They made the question far more pronounced. No answer at all. And I say this with complete humility. I felt at the moment, a lot was racing through my mind. I didn't have a lot of time to start preparing the speech. But I felt at the moment this idea what we call a Kiddush Hashem. And what I'm going to say is either going to disappoint, and people will go away with a message that they'll never forget. They may never come back to an environment to ask this question again. Or I'll say something that will give them some adequate approach. So like the stakes were high, and that doesn't happen every day. You don't always have a situation where you feel that responsibility. And that was because, frankly, my two colleagues were just, what should I say? They didn't, not just they didn't, so it wasn't that they didn't answer, they made things far worse. So what do you do? And I'm clueless. I have no idea what I'm going to say. I stood up. The lights were blaring. It was getting hot under the collar. And so you close your eyes for a second and you pray to God. And I said to myself, what would the Rebbe say? What would the Alter Rebbe say? Yud Tes Kislev, what would the Baal Shem Tov say? What would Moshe Rabbeinu? What would the Barditch? What would all those lovers of Jews who are unconditionally loving every Jew no matter what? Observant, not observant. What would they say? And I felt I had all the time in the world. I don't have to cut my cord, They created such a situation. I had this. So I said the following. I began with what I said earlier. Actually, I told you the punchline before the story, but I said the Alter Rebbe, Baal Tanya, and I invoked all the holy names, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, Yadi, the founder of Chabad, the Baal Tanya B'Shulchan Aruch. More titles I could add. I wanted to draw on his merits. Said that when you're asked a question and you don't have an answer for it, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. So I'm going to tell a story, and we'll see if I have to sing it. So I got a laugh from the crowd. It would have been nice if everybody said, okay, we got the answer, you can go home. But that was not meant to be. And I told the following story. This is the story with the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. Rashab, an acronym for Avshalom Dei Ber. The fifth Chabad Rebbe. Alter Rebbe is the first of the Chabad, the Rebbe the seventh is the fifth. So the year was Tofresh Mem Ches, which is equivalent of 1887, Simchas Torah. And the Rebbe Rashab said in a very classic discourse, he delivered a discourse about the quality of every soul, and especially of the simple people who are not educated, are not literate, not particularly pious, not particularly learned, but there's a simplicity to them. He spoke about it, he exalted them, that they in many ways even greater and the greatest scholars and the most pious, God-fearing people. Okay. There was a chassid of his name was Rabbi Moshe Mendelssohn. Very distinguished scholar, and oived, which means a person who really worked on himself, a very refined, and he came to the Rebbe Rashad after Yom Tov, after Simchas Torah, and he says to the Rebbe Rashad, the Rebbe always encourages us to ask questions, and I heard the Rebbe speak about the simple Jew, the simple person. Ad kedei kach, to that extent, I understand their equality, but the Rebbe was speaking in such a way like there's nothing greater. Almost like dismissing scholarship and Torah study and everything that comes with what is expected of us. Love and awe of God and so on. Now the Rebbe knew that this Rabbi Moshe was a diamond merchant. That's what he did for his livelihood. So he asked the chassid, he said, do you mind bringing a few, a collection of gemstones of different values? Okay, the Rebbe asks, he doesn't know why, fine, and he brings. Comes back, and the Rebbe says, I want to choose the most precious one in the lot here. And the Rebbe chooses the largest, most lustrous stone. And he said, Ramesh, is this? He didn't want to contradict the Rebbe, so he avoided answering. He said, Ramesh, I'm asking. He says, no, Rebbe, it's not. It's not the most precious one. He says, but it looks best. It looks better than all the others, the largest. So he said, with all due respect, Rebbe, you have to have a trained eye. The naked eye, you don't really see the value. I don't know if he said the 4 C's, carrot, color, cut, and so on. He said, you have to have a trained eye. So the Rebbe said to him, if that's the case with inanimate stones, how much more so with souls? You also have to have a trained eye. And he understood. A Rebbe can see souls. What do you see about soul? What you're looking at with your own external eyes, with your eyes of flesh and blood. So that's the story I told. I said, so first of all, what do we know about souls? Nothing. We barely know about our own soul, let alone other people's. I said, and I turned to that woman who asked the question, I said, you mentioned that you represent the largest group of the Jewish people, the unaffiliated. Let me ask you a question. Who decided which soul should go into which body, to which family, and which community? No one asked us. God decided. God decided to take one soul and put it into a home, a beautiful home, a functional home, a healthy home. Give the child a good education, nurturing, good Jewish education. And for some bizarre reason, God took another soul and put it into a very broken home. Just to use extremes, a dysfunctional home, no education, no Jewish education. And don't even know what Judaism is. Who decided this? No soul would say, yes, please put me into a home that is full of alcoholics or addicts or other type of dysfunction and abuse. So God, in His mysterious ways, decided this. So how are we to know? What do we know about the trajectory and the journey and the challenges? I said, I'm just digressing on this room right now. Who has the greatest soul in this room? So I'd Rabbi book it. And, I am staying by him tonight. So but who, does anyone know? I can tell you what we were taught, and I'm digressing. I'll go back to the story in a moment. How do we know? Who told you? Who told you who's the greatest soul? What is it dependent on? The person who's most observant? That's the person who maybe is action doing that. We don't know what souls are like. Anyway, to continue the story, and then I said, and I elaborated, and people were listening. I said, so, my final point is this, that the Alter Rebbe, again, Baal HaGeula of Yud Tes Kislev, that event didn't happen in Yud Tes Kislev, so I didn't mention that point. But the Alter Rebbe writes in a discourse, another revolutionary statement. He says that when Moses, the great Moses, was shown all the generations to come, and when it says in the Torah, it says that he was the humblest man that ever walked on this earth, Moses was. Why was he so humble? So the Alter Rebbe said, because he saw the latter generations, the generations of souls. Didn't talk about the Holocaust necessarily, but those generations where they would not have revelation. If anything, they would only have oppression and difficulties. And he was in awe because his generation was called the Dur Deya. They were an enlightened age, enlightened generation. They witnessed the miracles of Exodus, Mount Sinai, received the Torah, and yet they also had their challenges and were far from perfect. But here's a generation of Jews, assimilated Jews who don't have necessarily opportunities, and there's still a Jew trying to go to Shul Yom Kippur, or even struggling and asking the question, what is a Jew and who am I? That, thousands of years later, after all that we went through, there's still that burning flame. Even if the building is burning, but you still have that ember that's still smoldering. That humbled Moshe Rabbi. And then I concluded, I said, I was taught by my teachers, and by my Rabbi, that Mashiach comes tonight, you know what will happen? The people with the greatest challenges will march first, because they were given the greatest strengths, and that's how they were put in such difficult situations. And the rest of us will follow, and by tomorrow morning, every Jew, every human being, will recognize and realize that the best way to actualize yourself as a human being and as a Jew is through Torah and mitzvahs. That's what I was told. Now, at the risk of sounding like I'm tooting my horn, which I am in a way, but that's not my intention at all, to be very honest. Nothing to do with it. What happened in the room there was beyond words. Everybody stood up, standing ovation. And I saw it not as a compliment to me at all. As I said before, I sat at the feet of a Rebbe. A Rebbe that was just like the Alter Rebbe. This is what they taught. Everything I said was not some innovation that I came up with, like some cute answer. We were taught this it's in every fiber of my being, that we don't know the mystery of souls. And therefore the concept of judgmentalism or condescension is just not in the dictionary. Who are we to decide these things? If you have a God in your life, first thing you know that God runs the show, not you. And just because you may have a certain opinion or a certain preference doesn't mean that determines what a soul is about. The other two rabbis, they were pretty embarrassed and deservedly so. So I didn't have much compassion for them. But this woman came over to me and she just said the following line. She said, "You don't know what you did for me tonight." And that was it. I didn't ask. I respected her privacy. I never met her again. I know it would be a good ending for a speaker to say that 20 years later I met her and she's not there. And that didn't happen. Let you know if it does. But it doesn't matter. I don't need it to happen. The point I'm making, this is a pure contribution of Chassidus. There's no way that I could have answered that question. There's no way that any rabbi, any individual could have answered without a fundamental teaching. There's a chapter in Tanya. Tanya is the classic magnum opus of the Alter Rebbe, where he call it the Bible of Chassidus, actually, written Torah of Chassidus. And there's a chapter. And you know what the name of the chapter is? It's chapter 32. Number of the chapter, rather. 32 in Hebrew is Lev, heart. Now Lev also can be pronounced love. It's a chapter on love. And it'll be one of the most powerful chapters about love, more than all the romantic novels and films you'll ever read, anything in psychology. The Alter Rebbe, in just a few lines, described the essence of what true love is. And he said that true love is only possible when spirit dominates over matter. If a person makes their body and physical needs more important, there's no way you could have actual true love. It will always be conditional based on your needs. But when you connect to the spirit, and he goes on to explain it. Basically the essence that all souls, as he says there, come from one source. And we don't know. It says Kulam Asimus. And we have no idea. Those are the words. Who knows the greatness and magnitude of a soul? What do we know? That was where I took it from. But it wasn't like I quoted the chapter. It's just part of the very essence. Now, you can ask, so what, before the Alter Rebbe, no rabbi, no teacher, Rabbi Akiva didn't know this, Moshe Rabbi, of course they knew it. But it could sometimes, as I said, it could be lost in all the details. And this is the story to me captures another reason why it's not optional, where we're bringing tonight Yud Tes Kislev. It's not just events that happened 224 years ago. This message is relevant today more than ever. Imagine if we, each of us, and we taught this to our children and to our friends and every person on earth had this message. No judgmentalism. I mean, look at the society we live in today. Look at the polarization. Can't even disagree properly. Forget about opinions. Complete character assassination. You have to be wrong for me to be right. That type of thing. A completely unhealthy and insecure way even to disagree. So imagine this teaching of the Alter Rebbe affected the critical mass of this world. That's the revolution that the Alter Rebbe initiated. The thing that is so painful in a way, that is like the best kept secret. And I don't just mean the message. I mean, we're talking about the Alter Rebbe developed a whole system, a comprehensive blueprint of how to live life in the healthiest possible way. And it is the best kept secret. So I just want to say this before we say L'chaim. It's not just here to tell stories and appreciate what Chassidus is, but believe it or not, it makes us also all more responsible. Because when you know this, now you no longer can say, oh, I didn't know better. Now every person you meet, and every time you interact with someone, will it have a tinge of judgmentalism? If the Alter Rebbe means anything, if Tes Kislev means anything, is that we take away a message of how to look with the eyes, some more soulful eyes at each other. This doesn't mean some people are not wrong, but of course there are people, we all make mistakes. But we're not defined by our mistakes. We're defined by the essence of who we are, which is the peace of God. Also words of the Alter Rebbe in time. That we're created in the divine image. That we are peace of godliness. That's who we are essentially. We'll talk about that more after we sing a niggun. But that's what the responsibility is, that when we're here at Farbrengen Tes Kislev, is to take these messages, internalize them, and then act on it. Because at the end of the day, each of you have your sphere of influence. And that is also part of God's mysterious plan. The people you know that I don't know. Why do you know them? Why do you work with these people? Why are they your family? Why are they your clients? They're your vendors or whatever it may be. Because you have to give and pass on a message to them. And not a message where you are teaching and preaching to them. A message of love. Just like when you love somebody, you say, here's a great book I read. Why don't you try it out? I'm not talking about imposing, or not talking about demanding. And that's ultimately the Alter Rebbe also taught. Chassidus teaches that we are all either part of the problem or part of the solution. And when people say, I'm not sure which one I am, that's like the guy that said, I used to think I'm indecisive and now I'm not so sure. My father would say, as a journalist, he was a journalist, he would tell me that there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. We, each of us, especially as human beings, as Jews, as Chassidim, and Yud Tes Kislev, what we're charged is to make things happen. To be proactive, to take initiative, not just be on the sidelines, okay, if everybody's doing it, I'll also join. No, to take initiative. That's part of this approach. And wherever you see something that is a little off, teach, educate, inspire. That's the message of Chassidus. And that's the second point, in addition to what I said earlier about the wings. The idea of the mystery of the soul, the beauty, the dignity of the soul's journey, and especially the part that we don't understand. Because all of us are on this glorious journey with all kinds of twists and turns, and even the challenging moments are also part of the journey. So first you have to respect your own journey, but definitely at the same time also respect other people's journey. And yes, the Mashiach comes. What will happen is that every one of us, every person on this earth, will recognize their unique and indispensable mission in this world. And together we will celebrate like a cosmic symphony, where every musical note and every instrument is both necessary and at the same time complement the others in this unison and harmony within diversity. Beautiful cosmic symphony we call the Gula Hamidil Bashleim.
Hey
Please, if you want to talk, go outside. Help him. It's all over. $1 trillion industry of therapy, pharmaceuticals. And who knows the amount of time lost and waste due to our fighting demons and the darkness in our lives. Nobody's ever quantified it, because firstly, most people don't talk about it. Like if you were able to measure how much denial exists in this world, does anybody know? So this would make a very fascinating study and contrast of what we'll call the Alter Rebbe's approach, which again is based on a Torah approach, and especially considering that the Alter Rebbe lived 250 years ago. So this is like, we'd say, by a century preceded what is called modern psychology, namely beginning with Sigmund Freud. I don't know if you know this, but there are, I counted, around 45 to 50 current schools of thought within psychology. Whether it's Freud, whether it's Watson, whether it's Jung, Frankl, Adler, and the list goes on. Cognitive, behavioral, everything in between, over and under. So again, engaging with the world around us, it's fascinating to see. So what does the Torah have to say? What does Torah psychology look like? Which is another way of saying what Chassidus teaches. Now, the word psychology, by the way, is a combination of two words. It means the study of the soul. Logi is study, and psyche is the soul in Greek. Tanya is a story about two souls. So I thought it would be helpful, and maybe more than just helpful, to do this type of contrast study, to appreciate what Chassidus is. I know some may say, why do we have to make comparisons? Why don't you just say an idea in Chassidus? Because I find, in the words of Chassidic thought, that sometimes you want to appreciate light, you see it in a dark room, you can appreciate light. You see it by contrasting it. So maybe an apt, another anecdote can help. You may have heard of this one, but it definitely fits here. So little Lucy comes home from school, and she's studying biology, the origin of our species. And she's all confused, so she asks her mother, where do we come from? You know, everyone comes of age and you figure out, where do we come from? I don't just mean where babies come from. Where do we originate? Who are our ancestors? So her mother, face breaks out in a beautiful warm smile, beaming. I've always waited for this day. Sit down, my dear Lucy. And her mother starts telling her, We had a grandfather came from a small town in Poland, a grandfather from a city in Czechoslovakia. Go back a few generations before that, we had a great-grandfather who was a famous compiler, author of an important work on Jewish law. And the further back we go, the better it gets. All the way to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, all the way to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Pretty good, right? It's called the Yichus. Okay. Then her father comes home, Lucy's, and she asks him the same question. And here, in stark contrast, her father's face gets all ashen and disturbed, and he says, "Oh, I always rued this day." And he sits her down, "Brace yourself." Where we come from? Well, a few million years back, we originated from primates. What's a primate? Apes, monkeys. And you go back a little more, amphibians from the sea. And before that, single-celled bacteria. And as far back as we can trace, a ball of gas. So you can imagine Lucy now is even more confused. She loves her parents. Her mother tells her one thing, her father another. So she runs back to her mother and says, "I don't understand. I know you disagree about a few things, but this is like very fundamental." And her mother nonchalantly smiles and says, "We both told you the truth. Your father told you about his side of the family. And I told you about my side of the family." So there you have it, the ultimate reconciliation between evolution and creationism. Depends which side of the family. So beyond the humor, it actually does reflect two different approaches to life. And here's what I want to introduce, the Alter Rebbe's chidush, as we call it, the revolution, innovation. So we could choose any psychologist, but Freud is maybe a good way to begin. So you don't need to be Freudian to know popular culture today. There's the thing called the id, that the driving force, if you cut beneath the surface all the way to the root of the drives within the human being, comes down to pleasure, especially connected with sexuality. In German called the id. But since human beings evolved as intelligent creatures, we know we can't just follow every selfish and narcissistic whim. So we have an ego and a superego that somewhat monitors things. Call it green lights and red lights. To coexist and not kill each other, we need to impose some rules. But it's not inherent. Push comes to shove, we're just simple animals. And many indicate proof of the fact. Don't look at a regular situation. Look at it after an avalanche, or when people are under duress, torture. You can see very normal people seemingly turn to cannibalism, God forbid. Torture. No one should ever be tested. Most of us would like to believe, no matter what, you'd never turn in your brother or sister to save your own skin. Yeah, but some people did. So you wonder, is that who we really are? At the end of the day, at heart, really animals? You know, the classic example, what some call social Darwinism. The two guys go camping, and in the middle of the night, one of them wakes up and says, "Oh boy, there's a bear out there rustling about." So he wakes up his friend and says, "Hey, we got to get out of here, there's a bear." And while he's doing that, he's tying his shoelaces, his sneakers. And his friend says, "What do you think, you can outrun the bear?" He says, "No, all I have to do is outrun you." Dog eats dog, survival of the fittest. So this is as disturbing and as ugly as it sounds. This is pretty much a prevalent approach. Nobody's going to announce it that way. No one's going to get up that all I care about is me, me, me. But just look at what happens in courts. Look what happens to people who say they fell in love, and 2 years later they're in the ugliest war. What people can stoop to. Now, I'm not making a case for that theory, but you could argue
Yeah, put people in the right circumstances and they'll turn into literally animals, beasts. We don't need much proof. Look what happened in Germany 80 years ago. When people come up and they decide what they think is right and wrong and so on. Okay. Now, Freud was a Jew, as we know. It would have been interesting to meet his mother, because it definitely had some impact on him. So the ideas that he introduced have actually some Jewish roots. The idea that there's a subconscious, that our behavior, our external behavior is coming from something deeper inside us. The question is what that thing is. So now, let's go 100 years pre-Freud. Reb Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaGeula and V'Asimcha of Yud Tes Kislev. What does he say? And he had not met Freud, it was all before that. He says, based on, obviously grounded in written Torah and oral Torah, he makes it very clear in his book of Tanya that what is the inherent nature of a human being is goodness. We're a piece of the divine. Yes, we have another voice. It's called the animal soul. But that's one soul. There's another soul called the divine soul. And it aspires toward transcendence and toward nobility and sensitivity and virtue and kindness. So the way we can put it is this, that Freud dug, but he didn't dig deep enough. Where he dug into the recesses of the abyss of his heart and soul and those that he met, was he reached the id, and that was that. And the Alter Rebbe dug a little deeper, and he found the yid, not the id. The Pintele yud, put a y or a yud before id, it's a spark, the spark of the divine. It's not a contradiction. The fact is, yes, we all have another voice. We all know that people can behave sometimes in ways that are selfish. I mean, you don't need proof for that. But does that define you? And that's the key difference. I'm not going to say every school of psychology, but many ultimately contend with or even surrender to the fact that human beings have a certain inherent selfishness. Now, it shouldn't surprise us. How do they know better? All they can look at is themselves, history, and the people around them. The Alter Rebbe did have an advantage. The fact is that he was a divine human being. He understood what a soul was. Whether he understood it through his own observations or through studying Torah, probably a combination of both. But he introduced a way of looking at a human being that's very different. You look at almost every article in the Western canon of literature or even just plain journalistic articles, you'll see everything is explained with a biological approach, that everything is driven by one force, survival of the species. And even when we're altruistic and kind, it's also because it's good for us, because you get payback. It's good for the species to have family, to have community, to have others that support you, helps protect you. But the concept of altruism purely because your soul is altruistic is not a very common theme in most secular schools of thought today. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but I'm spelling it out specifically in this very stark way, because it's not obviously extreme, but still. So you would want to talk about a contribution of Chassidus? It's how we look at the human being. It's how we look at yourself, how you look at yourself, how we look at each other. Remember, this does not deny the fact that we can behave sometimes in atrocious ways and selfish ways. But that's not you. When you're doing that, in a way it's a masquerade. It's not the essence of who you really are. The essence of who you really are is goodness, because the essence of everything is God, and God is good. Yet, God sent this good soul into a difficult world. Another central theme of Chassidus, that the soul comes into this world with many challenges, and we can forget where we originate from. And we could start thinking that we are really made of the same fabric as materialism, when in truth, as some say, We're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. And in this world, we have the opportunity to use the challenges, yes, the challenges of selfishness and animalistic and impulsive behavior to catapult us and propel us to far greater heights. Yet another contribution of Chassidus that the Alter Rebbe emphasizes so much in Tanya, that every dark moment is not an end in itself. Just like the id is not the end in itself, everything is driven by some higher good. This doesn't justify pain and doesn't justify loss. That's in the realm of the areas that we will never understand. Silence is ultimately the answer to real tragedy. But that doesn't mean that we can't grow through it. As the Rebbe once, or Wada once would say often, that we may not know why things happen, but we can ask, what are we supposed to do about it? And that's empowering, because the last thing you want to become is a victim of circumstances. Because the implications of what I'm saying really comes down to this, that when something happens to you, let's say, God forbid, no one should ever know of a trauma, a loss, a tragedy. The question is, what happens next? Does that define who you are? And very often, that's what will happen. We'll succumb to it and say, this is me. Whereas the real approach is, no, it's not you. It happened to you. I mentioned before Jewish survival. You know how we made it? Because we never allowed suffering to define us. We didn't ignore it, but we didn't define us. We're not sufferers. It's like a good swimmer. Even when the storm strikes, a good swimmer knows how to navigate. Navigation is the key. You don't control what's going to happen, but you absolutely control your attitude. Yet again, another principle. Now, I can go on. This is my life. I've lived this my whole life, so this is like what I breathe. And what I want to convey most of all is this, that we have before us the best kept secret. The best kept secret is the body of Hasidic thought. And you think it's 5 pages? No, it's not 10 pages. It's thousands of pages, thousands. That's not meant to frighten anyone. It's meant to show there's a comprehensive blueprint. Began by the Alter Rebbe, wrote an entire book called Tanya, but then he delivered far more, what he said orally, every Shabbos and during different occasions, thousands of pages of developing I would call it a psychology, or you can call it a philosophy/psychology of how to look at life and how to look at every circumstance in life. And you'd be surprised to know that there is no topic that's not addressed. Everything is addressed. So today, as we sit here in Yud Tes Kislev, what better way to celebrate is by recognizing we have a gift that was given to us. So, not sure who your rabbis are, but if it's Rabbi Bucket, or I see Rabbi Denberg walked in, and other rabbis here, so I'm going to say something that they may not like. You have to knock down their doors, whether it's day or night, and say, I want you to teach me Chassidus, because I hear there are answers to all my issues there. You know, and you are privy. That's what you were taught, and that's why you're here, Boca Raton, or wherever anyone may be. There are answers, and as I said, you'll be surprised. You think it only talks about general things. No, answers to literally every issue. That doesn't mean that it solves every problem, but it gives you tools, the tools to navigate. Now, you tell me, if every person on this earth, including us, would look at ourselves through the eyes that I described, just the minimal that I described, of Hasidic thought, what a soul is, what you are, who you really can be, not just who you think you are, what you're capable of, and how we look at others, would this not be the formula to eradicate most of the ills of our time? And I'm not trying to be simplistic. I understand things are more complicated and things don't change overnight. But I have no doubt that the Alter Rebbe sat in prison for 53 days for a reason. He sat in prison because afterwards he suffered. And his successor, the Rebbe Rashab I mentioned before, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, said it's difficult to say this about Yud Tes Kislev, but the Alter Rebbe went through what the Talmud says. Like an olive that doesn't produce oil until you press it. We need pressure. And the Alter Rebbe's pressure that he was sitting in prison, disrespected, not treated the way he should have been treated. But what did it bring out of him? Not demoralization and not surrender. Came out stronger than ever and developed this corpus of Chabad Chassidus, tools for all of us to live by that can help us in any given situation, whether it's difficulties or good times. Now let's be honest. Even though individually many of us may have our challenges, but collectively, it's never been as good for Jews as it is today. We can sit here on Yud Tes Kislev night, Farbrengen. My father grew up in Stalinist Russia. There was no such gatherings. There were gatherings, but they were in basements. I remember hearing from Professor Yirmiyahu Baranover, may have a complete miraculous refuah shlema. So he lived in Riga, which was under Soviet control. I remember saying this, it was so touching. He said, when we would Farbrengen Yud Tes Kislev in the basement, we had a few milk cartons and a cardboard for a table, little l'chaim, maybe sometimes herring. And we would rotate, because there was one small window in the basement, people to look out the window in case anybody's coming by. So they would rotate. Every half hour, somebody would stand at the window. And the 10 or 11 of us, we knew, that we're talking about now in the mid-60s, we felt like kings. We felt that the whole world is standing on us, on our shoulders. Because we knew in America, the Rebbe was Farbrengen, we knew Jews in Israel, everywhere were Farbrengen, but they didn't have any of these challenges. We felt that we were like the last, survivors, so to speak. He said, it was so extraordinary. I said, what happened after you came out? He says, I never had that experience. Once you taste freedom, you don't feel that. Obviously, we're not talking about turning back the clock, but there's something about it. Maybe we'll sing the Niggin soon, Samalacha Nafshi, the classic song that says, Samalacha Nafshi, my spirit, my soul thirsts for you. Kamalacha Psari, and the pine, my flesh is pining, because I'm living be'eretz tziyah v'oyif in a very dry and arid land, without water, thirsty. And then the end of the sentence, or the end of the verse is, Kein bach kodesh chazisicha. So too, when I dwell in holiness, I should see, I should gaze at you. So the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Chassidus, the Rebbe of the Alter Rebbe, asked the question, what's the connection between the first half of the phrase and the second half? So he translates that the word Cain b'kodesh shouldn't be written as, but halavai. May it be that when I'm dwelling in holiness and in light and in beauty and in comfort, I should have the same passion that I had when I was thirsty in a desert, in an arid, parched land. So not that we want the parched land, but we want the passion of it. And that, my friends, I believe, is the great challenge today. Yud Tes Kislev, 224 years ago, even when the Alter Rebbe came out of prison, it was still Tsarist Russia. It wasn't exactly easy for the Jews. And the generations after that, some ways got even more difficult. But then something changed. You know when it was? After World War II. When our Rebbe, the seventh generation, became Rebbe, it was 1950. A new world. And we take it for granted at times, unless some of us that remember. I mean, I heard it from my father, how they would go to sleep and wake up in fear, 24/7 fear. I don't even know what that means. Unfortunately today people have it for other reasons. So we live in a sense of comfort in our comfort zones. So the challenge today in many ways is more difficult, because when you have an enemy without, the enemy makes sure to crystallize your values. You have no room for being mediocre or complacent, because you have to fight for what you believe in. Today, hey, there's always tomorrow. Comfort zones. So the battles that we have to fight today is really against apathy. We can be inspired here tonight, but we all know inspiration is one thing, and maintenance contracts are always more expensive. To maintain it, to sustain it, is not that simple. So what do we do to carry an inspiration from a Farbrengen into our so-called routines? When we go back and gravitate back, everybody back to their regular stuff. Well, one of the things that the Rebbes teach us, and the Alter Rebbe, starting with the Alter Rebbe, is that you have to commit to something. Don't let the inspiration dissipate. Use it like a spark that ignites something and make a chlata, a resolution. One resolution, start learning Chassidus. Even if you're learning it, there's always more, learning it with more relevance. Some of you may know I had the privilege for many years, this may be my claim to fame, to sit as a chayzer and a maniach. I didn't actually sit, to stand in front of the Rebbe. And on Shabbos and Yom Tov and holidays when no notes were taken and no recordings were made. So how do we have all the teachings? Well, there were a few of us that had the capacity to remember verbatim, sometimes 5, 6, 7 hours of these talks. And not just to remember it, then was the second part of it was to write it down and publish it. So I was one of the few that was involved in that process. We continue staying in this Farbrengen tonight. I'll be happy to share much more about it. But the point I wanted to make was that I had the privilege to ask the Rebbe any question. We had no censorship. Whatever we want, we could ask, because it wasn't officially, the excuse was because we're publishing the works. So we could clarify points. So trust me, I don't want to use the word abuse, but I definitely exploited the situation to the fullest. Whatever I was able to ask, I asked. Somewhere the Rebbe hinted about the Holocaust, the questions about why, all the big ones. You have access to a man like that. It's like access to the Alter Rebbe. Well, of course, you have to be crazy not to try to take full advantage. Sometimes we got it over our heads, where the Rebbe's like saying, you think you're worthy of asking such a... I didn't say it in those words, but there were times where the Rebbe said, like, which school did you go to that they educated you? You can ask me such a question type of thing, So, but it was still worth it, because we were able to draw out. So I asked the Rebbe once, if you look in Tanya, it says, on the Sharblat, the cover page of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe himself wrote that the book is based on a verse. The verse is, Ki karev elecha dover ma'id, beficha b'lvavcha la'aseiser. Which is a verse that Moses, before he passed away, said to the Jewish people, that you may think in the long journey for seeking, finding God and Torah mitzvahs, that it may be difficult, not accessible. So I want to tell you that the Torah is not in heaven, and it's not across a wide sea, and it's not distant, but karev elecha. Now the word karev is a very interesting word. Everyone translates, it means close. Close to you, not far, not distant. So I asked the Rebbe, because I was teaching Tanya at the time, and I asked, can you translate karev with the word relevant? Not close, not even accessible, relevant. And the Rebbe, in his very short style, made a check and said yes. So, relevant, it's a very powerful word. You could sit near a Torah scroll and not find it relevant. You can sit closely to it physically, but not be spiritually close to it. I mean, you could be sitting near someone that you don't really like. Closeness is not just proximity on a physical time and space. Closeness means it's relevant to you. And as such, that transforms how you look at the whole thing, that Chassidus is essentially a relevant blueprint for life. So resolution number one, I would say, is to not just study it, but study it in a way that you apply it to your personal life. You have an issue, a challenge, and who doesn't have one? Issues. Everybody's got issues. It's a big word. Bring the issue and say, okay, what does Torah, what does Chassidus have to say to this? And if you find a relevant answer, then come on, That just proves the point. This to me is I believe, the crux of what we're trying to derive from Yud Tes Kislev. A second lesson, I would say, is our responsibility not just to ourselves, but to others. It's common to say they're Chabad shluchim, that means Chabad emissaries, ambassadors. They are here, they went away from their comforts in their own homes and cities and came to different parts of the world. But the fact is, the Rebbe, in every talk that he delivered about this, he said every person is a shliach. It's not just a few select. You, everyone sitting in this room, as soon as you hear, well, even if you don't hear, why are you here on this earth? Because God sent you here. So you're already a shliach of God. God put you in this place, in this world, gave you particular skills, particular talents, particular opportunities that you and only you have. So the next question is, are you using it to the fullest? I can tell you some of the many talks the Rebbe delivered. One of the things that always struck me was one of the things that Rebbe was always passionate about. I remember once him saying, every person here and every person everywhere has a unique, indispensable role to play that you and only you can accomplish. And if you don't do it, the Rebbe's words were, you upset the whole balance. Because God, the choreographer, planned it this way, and one person is not doing what they should be doing, so it affects all of us. It would be like I mentioned before, a symphony, and one of the musicians decides, he's MIA. He's not playing. What do you think is going to affect the entire music? Now, for some this may sound, oh wow, that's too much, too heavy. I would say this is the most empowering statement, that there are 8 billion people on this earth, and you're not insignificant. You're not just another grain of sand on a beach. You are an indispensable soul with something unique to accomplish. And just like a business can't function without a mission statement, the truth is we don't really function completely unless we have a personal mission statement. So Yud Tes Kislev is a great day to ask, what is your personal mission? Now, most people will say to be happy, to make money, and then I can do whatever I want, or to have a good family, healthy family. Those are all beautiful things, but they don't qualify as a mission. If a company would say our mission statement is to be happy or to make a lot of money, that's not a mission. A mission has to be unique, short, concise, measurable, and doable. So there you have several things. I think it's already a mouthful of what we can take from Yud Tes Kislev. Because at the end of the day, it's all about what the follow-up is like. No matter what has been said here this evening, and I hope I shared some thoughts that are meaningful. So yes, it's about how to look at yourself and others, but at the end of the day is, what are you going to do about it? I mentioned before, how are you going to make things happen? I'll share a personal story. When I was bar mitzvah, it was the year 1969. You want to calculate my age? You can have a second. Go ahead. People like to do that, So I lived in Crown Heights, and as children, on Simchas Torah, one of the memorable moments was that when the Rebbe would dance at the Hakafis, Simchas Torah, there's the dance. So we were under the tables there. They weren't really tables, whatever they were. But, and the Rebbe would bend down and we would kiss the Sefer Torah. It was very special. We couldn't last too long there because there was so many people. It was like a crush. But for one or two of the Hakafis or the dances, we were there. Now, I turned bar mitzvah. So now, when you turn 13, you think you're an adult, right? They stuck a 20-gallon hat on my head. And I thought, okay, here I am. Now I'm one of the adults. I'm not sitting under a table anymore. And I had some of my relatives, my uncles. So I said, can I stand near you? I went up on one of the bleachers, 770. So there was on the floor, and there were the bleachers up by the walls. So I was standing at one of the bleachers with one of my uncles. After the first dance, the Rebbe danced with his brother-in-law, the Rashag, Rabbi Shmayo Gerari. And my father was in that vicinity. And the Rebbe says to my father, where's your son? So my father proudly points to me, standing there, and I'm beaming like an idiot, and the Rebbe said, but he used to dance with us here. So my father says, okay. So the Rebbe says, he also became now a spectator. That's what the Rebbe said. So of course, it was very clear that I shouldn't remain there, so I came running down, and I never went back into the bleachers. And as a matter of fact, everyone that heard the story that year would stand on the ground after that. They let the guests in the spectator. So I guess maybe the Rebbe actually implanted in me a disruptive gene or something to try not to be a spectator and to make trouble at times. I don't know if I'm doing it or not, but I like to believe I'm trying. So it reminded me of, you may have heard of a man called Shimshon Stock. Like Tevye, a fiddler on the roof of Crown Heights, was Shimshon Stock. There's always a Shimshon in every community. Now, Shimshon Stock was an American boy, And in the 40s, before the Rebbe became Rebbe, he was like I guess a type of court jester, maybe, I don't know what the word would be. But the Rebbe, for some reason, they made time Saturday night after Shabbos. He would study with the Rebbe 15 minutes. The Rebbe wasn't Rebbe yet. He was called Ramash, acronym of his name. And they would study Talmud or Shulchan Aruch for 15 or 30 minutes every Saturday night. One Saturday night, the Rebbe comes, the Ramash comes to his designated place, and Shimshon isn't to be found. So the Rebbe goes out on the porch of 770, and he's looking around. Yeah, there he sees Shimshon's running to the subway station, Kingston and Eastern Parkway. And the Rebbe, calls him and says, "Where are you? We have time to learn now." He says, "Rebbe, or Rabbi, tonight something special. I can't learn." The Rebbe said, "What's more precious than learning Torah?" He says, "Trust me, there's something more precious. I just can't tell you what it is." So the Rebbe said, "No, that's not fair. I designated time. At least tell me where you're going." Okay, the Brooklyn Dodgers are playing the Yankees. The Brooklyn Dodgers were on Ebbets Field, which is basically Rogers and Crown Street, Crown Heights. Now there's whatever it's called, a big complex of homes. It's called Ebbets Field, before they moved to Los Angeles in 1955, was it? Yeah, 57. Jackie Robinson, yeah. Yeah. So the Rebbe says to him, or he says to the Rebbe, and by the way, Rabbi, if you want, I can get an extra ticket, you can come along. So the Rebbe said, no, he smiled and respectfully declined. So then, and the Rebbe says to him, and tell me, how much did these tickets cost? So what did they cost in 1946 or whatever? 50 cents?
1956.
No, this was in the 40s. So it was, I don't know, 20 cents, who knows what a ticket was. So the Rebbe says, so explain this to me. So you're paying this and this amount of money to watch other people play the game. I'm offering you for free to be a player in the game. When I heard the story, because I used it in Torah Meaningful Life, I asked Shimshon, so what'd you say? He says, well, I didn't accept the offer. I went to the game. And then he said, with a little tear in his eye, he said, and I'm still not a player in the game. I'm still watching others play. And I'm paying for it too. What do they say? That there are 50,000 people in the stadium who need to lose weight are watching 18 that don't. And so what I say is, this is like a tremendous message. The message of that you are a player in the game, that you control destiny, that we're not bystanders and we're not spectators, and we're not just observant Jews as observing others, but we are players. I mean, what can be a more empowering statement when we tell our children that you make a difference? You make a difference. No, you're not just another statistic. That you matter, you're valuable, and the world needs you. I need you. Your family needs you. That you have something to contribute that only you can contribute. I remember it was the night, 2 nights after the Rebbe's passing. So we're talking about Gimel Tammuz was Saturday night in the year 1994. And it was Tuesday night after that. And I was interviewed by Charlie Rose. I don't know if you can mention his name these days, but I just did. And interesting, that same night I was also interviewed by Larry King, CNN. But with Charlie Rose, I was in the studio with Ari Goldman. He was then the New York Times religion editor. Can you mention New York Times? Well, I mentioned it. Okay. I don't know what's going on, So, I'm not going to mention Donald Trump. Okay. I don't know, I just thought it was a good joke. What do you want? No, don't read into it. I didn't mean anything. So, it was Charlie Rose, who actually was a very good interviewer. He did research. I remember he leaned over to me, and he said, It's all live, so no preparation. I have no idea what he was going to ask. He said, so tell me, you sat at the feet of this great man. What was it like? Well, so some people would say the charisma, the Rebbe's blue eyes, whatever. So what came to me, come spontaneously, I said, you felt that you, not the Rebbe, that you have an indispensable mission to accomplish in this world. You felt compelled to do it, empowered. And I remember he responded, he said, wow, I would have liked to meet such a man. And that's interesting because usually you think about a leader, like I said, their charisma, their presence, how great they are, how genius they are, and brilliant. And it wasn't that way. It was about the individual. I mean, that's called not just selflessness. It means that the focus here is not on the person. The focus is on a cause. We have a mission to accomplish here. We have a war to fight. And I mean a spiritual war. And that's the secret why you find thousands and thousands of Chabad, shluchim and shluches, men and women, many who never met the Rebbe physically. And you don't have anyone quitting. And when people ask the question, so how's it possible? I remember a journalist asking me, how's it possible that Chabad is running without a CEO? The company can run without a CEO, has not been here physically almost 30 years. And the answer is because Chabad's not a company, and the Rebbe wasn't a CEO. He's talking about a spiritual leader who ignited, not created, he ignited the soul in other people. And once you ignite a soul, once you unleash revolution, there's no way to bottle it. Every young man and woman, ask them, why are you on shlichus? Not getting into now what they do and how well they do it, but the mere fact that they are in that place on the front line is because their soul was ignited. And when they were young and unjaded and receptive and impressionable, yeah. I mean, that is not, you can't bottle that. I mean, every company would love to figure out how can you do that? How can you create a decentralized system without a physical CEO? And it's not just growing, it's thriving and doubling and tripling and so on and so forth. Because we're not dealing here with material success, you're dealing here with a spiritual revolution. And by extension, every one of us sitting here, every one of you, without exception, is part of it. Not as just an observer or even a supporter, but an active player. Not a spectator, a player. So, at the end of the day, that's what Yud Tes Kislev is here. I mean, 224 years later. For many it's a story that happened. But it's not, it's alive. It's alive because we are its agents. We are those agents of change. The Alter Rebbe took Torah of thousands of years and he encapsulated it into a formula, a blueprint that addresses every issue in life and empowers us to live up to the calling and mission for which we were sent to this world. Best way to capture it. I mean, to me, once you hear that, I mean, what can be more important? Now, that's not ignoring all the important things we're involved in. I'm sure everybody has their commitments and beautiful things. But at the end of the day, there's also the big picture, and we're part of that big picture. So we sit at Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen, and we connect to all the Farbrengens going on all over the world this year and last year and 2 years ago. And for me, I don't have to even dig far back. I remember standing the Rebbe's Farbrengen Yud Tes Kislev. It was awesome when they started Chabad Shalom in the beginning. Thousands of people. And I'm not even talking about the messages that were shared. Just that invisible, almost unspoken unity of many people from different backgrounds and walks of life all joining in a revolution. And it's nothing less than that. It's a revolution. It's not just a regular thing. We're looking to a revolution. And when the Baal Shem Tov heard from Mashiach himself, when will you come? His answer was 3 words. When the well springs of Chassidus will be spread everywhere. Now, who's going to do that spreading? Who are the distributors? That's us. No one's asking us to create the content. No one's asking us to create the marketplace. But we are distributors. But distributors are not a small thing. If you don't have distribution, you end up having books sitting on shelves and products that aren't used. So we are the distributors, everyone in our own way. They call pay it forward, whatever expression you want to use. We have to feel that responsibility. Now, I hope I'm not saying this in a way that comes across like I'm preaching. I'm speaking to myself as much as I am to you, sharing from my heart what I believe is trying to do justice. You know, I would cry when I would see the hours and hours the Rebbe would spend, the patience, the restraint. I mean, it was beyond words. With people that were, you know, whether we got all that he said, I don't know. But the hours of repeating certain points again and again and again. And then you think about 7 generations of Rebbes spending how many thousands of hours writing chassidus. They saw that as the single most important thing they can do, because they knew they're leaving for posterity, for us, a blueprint, tools. So now the question is, are we going to live up to it? You know, every generation is like a marathon. The baton has been passed to us now. So no matter the fact that we may be a far weaker generation spiritually than all the generations past, but one thing we have, we're here. The baton is passed to us. So our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and all the prices they paid are in heaven, and they're looking at you and at us and myself and all of us. What are you going to do? I mean, this is how we should wake up in the morning and how we should think. And it doesn't change everything in your life. It just infuses it with another sense, another dimension, another sense of urgency, that we have the ability to finish the process. And it really means it's thousands of years of running this marathon, and now the baton is in our hands. The next move is yours, ours. L'chaim. Yeah. So what we'll do now is a traditional song always sung by Farbrengens is the Alter Rebbe's Nigun, a very awesome and very holy song. It's only sung at rare occasions, and it's preceded by a preparatory song. So this is a good time to close your eyes, open your hearts and souls, and ask for anything you wish. Alter Rebbe promised that anyone who celebrates the Yud Tes Kislev, he personally will intercede to bring you blessings in health, children, nachas, joy, and everything that your heart desires. So we'll sing together now. Achana and Alter Rebbe's Nigun. L'chaim.
Yama mama ya is not me mood. I'm in boy at the Daka Chunky Tame Bakabo. Hey, Yashuritzi Clubs, is not me mood. Boy at the Daka Chunky Tame Bakabo. Yeah, you did it. My la la, ya mama, ya, you did it. My ya, you did it. My ya, hey, All right, the next thing we're going to do is Tzabal Chanafshi, one of the 10. We're going to the Alter Rebbe. You know it, sing along. What key you on? All right. kein ba koedes khazi si kho liroy sus kho odevodech re ya re ya na ra re ya na ya ra ya mama re ya na ya ra re ya na ya ra ya na da 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 ya na da ya da ya na da la da la ya na da da ya da ya hey Masai Kosimal Oilich Sheya Putzu Manasat Chutza Hey Masai Kosimal Oilich Sheya Putzu Manasat Chutza Masai Kosimal Oilich Sheya Putzu Masai Kosimal Oilich Sheya Putzu Hey, Masai, Kosimar, Hey, Lechesheya Futsu, Manasan Kotumutza, Hey, Masai, Hey, Kosimar, Hey, Lechesheya Futsu, Manasan Kotumutza, Hey, Masai, Kosimar, Lechesheya Futsu, Masai, Kosimar, I live in Shaya food. You want another nigga?
You don't? I know. I apologize. I'm very bad at names. Very bad at names.
You're the host. It's okay.
Everybody come closer here. If everybody can come closer to come for bring closer together, we can come move up closer.
Okay, I didn't sell anything yet.
You never know where you are in the world.
Lives in Boca.
Okay, no, I see.
He lives in Boca.
I know him before pre-Boca. They think you're a Boca resident. I know you pre-Boca. L'chaim. Now, if you guys want to move a little closer.
Everybody come closer. We don't just we make it more Hamish over here.
Now we can talk off the record.
Off the record.
All the compliments. I'm kidding still. You warmed up? You haven't heard anything yet.
There's a very fascinating talk, Sikha, from the Frierdiker Rebbe that he delivered in the first year after he left Russia, after the imprisonment, and so this talk was delivered on Friday night, Pasha Kisisa, Purim time, Tafresh Beiches, which would be the equivalent of 1928 in Riga, Latvia. And he talks about, I think it's the only time that you find where he describes so-called innovation of the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaSimcha V'Geula of Yud Tes Kislev, in comparison to the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. And he compares it to the difference between the patriarchs, the Aves, and Matan Torah. Why didn't God give the Torah right in the beginning of creation? Because you have to prepare the ground, just like education. You don't just become bar mitzvah at birth. God wanted things to be in an orderly fashion. So they have to plow the ground, so to speak, plow and prepare the ground, and then can come the next level of revelation. So the words there of the Sikha, there's what Chassidus calls Shacham al-Mayl Lamata. At first you have like a transmission from the top down. That's like parents parenting their children. The children are not yet mature enough to initiate, so they have to be prodded on, they have to be inspired from above. And then comes the work from the bottom up, where now it's expected, you got an inspiration, now you have to take initiative. So he says the Baal Shem Tov of the Maggid was more of a transmission from above. Like, came the time God said, revelation of Pnimis Torah, the inner dimension of Chassidus, and the Alter Rebbe began to integrate it and internalize it. And he brings there interesting story. You don't find this very, I didn't really research all the sources, but I think it's one of the rare places where he says that when the Maggid, the teacher of the Rebbe, of the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe of the Alter Rebbe, who by the way is, or maybe not by the way, today's Yud Tes Kislev is also his 250th yahrzeit. 250, Tavkuf Lamed Gimel, Tav Shin Pei Gimel. The same day that the Alter Rebbe was released from prison was the day when his Rebbe was the Stalkus, which is considered an auspicious day. So it says when the Maggid passed away, so there's the concept of Torah, that the students have the ability to so-called prepare the sacred holy body for its next leg of its journey, called Torah, and the Alter Rebbe Rezeicha merited to the Torah of the Rosh, the head of his Rebbe. It's considered a particular, obviously there's always mixed feelings about it, but nevertheless, so he says there why. There were other students of the Maggid that were older than him, great students. Why? And the reason he gives us two reasons. Because the Alter Rebbe did two things that the Maggid had said that he's indebted to him. So all the students understood that of all the students, the Alter Rebbe should be the one that is the Torah of the purification of the head of the Maggid. What are the two things? One is that the Maggid had told the Alter Rebbe that you saved my life. And the second is that you saved my son's life. And he elaborates. How did he save the Maggid's life? Because, as we know, the whole reason Alter Rebbe was in prison in the first place was not because the Tsar had any power. It's because God orchestrated it all. And there was in heaven a challenge. A challenge whether the Alter Rebbe's approach to explain the so-called most precious gem of Judaism, Torah, the inner dimension. All the years it was always taught in private. In Dershim Merkov Ela B'Yachid, one-on-one. Why? Because when you're dealing with very, very subtle and powerful teachings, you have to appreciate it, and not everybody can just master it. And if you don't, you can also end up somewhat abusing it, if you wish, or somewhat diminishing its value. It's like you'll find the great masters, whether in music or not, they passed it on to one student, and they trusted that student. It's not something for the masses. As soon as something goes to the masses, even though on one hand, from a commercial point of view, it's like maybe you make more money, but from a quality point of view, you always see quality products usually are for less quality. Now here I'm talking simple physical examples, but if you talk about spiritually, it was a challenge. It was not a simple matter. Any great revelation in this world is always going to come with resistance. And the same happened during the time of the Maggid. Relatively speaking, the Maggid would speak Chassidus more than ever before in a way that people could understand it, even people that were not necessarily on the most lofty level. The Maggid had a student and a colleague. His name was Pinchas Karitzer, and his approach was somewhat more discretion and more careful. And he had the language in the Sikha there is that he had like a kpeda. How do you translate kpeda? He had a grievance, so to speak, on the way the Maggid was teaching. Not that he, God forbid, questioned the Maggid, but his approach, the Maggid was doing things that were not done before. And of all things that should happen is that he seemed that he was right, because one day they went outside and they saw a page of Chassidus was on the floor. It fell on the floor. And Pinchas Karitz saw that as a sign that he's right, you see? It's not being appreciated. It's like, a Sefer Torah, God forbid, belongs in the ark. If you see it on the floor, something's wrong. Someone's not appreciating. So he had a strong so-called grievance to the point that it put the Maggid's life in danger. That's what he says in this talk. Listen what happened next. The Alter Rebbe sensed what's going on. His teacher, the Maggid, is being challenged. So the Alter Rebbe then said that famous example that we all know. That was the context. He didn't just say it out of the blue. He said it to so-called defend his teacher, his Rebbe. And he said, example of a king who had an ailing and son that was deathly ill, and the doctors had given up hope, and nobody knew what to do. And for the king, this was like his only child. And finally, a doctor came and said, maybe, if you take the most precious stone in the king's crown, and you crush it, turn it into powder, and mix it with liquid water, and you try to force it between the clenched teeth of the sick child. So even though much of that water may drop and spill on the floor, but if one drop gets in and saves his life, in that actual sikha, he says the king wasn't ready to agree immediately. It was only when he saw that things got even more dire and more, that it was really like literally the last moment, then he agreed. And what happened was it saved the child. What does he need his crown? What does he need his whole kingdom if he doesn't have an heir, he doesn't have his child? When Pinchas Karitz heard that marshal, so it says, Noch daite, he removed his grievance, so to speak, his challenge, and therefore the Maggid was, the decree, so to speak, against the Maggid was removed. So the Maggid said then to the Alter Rebbe that because of you I lived more years. Basically saved his life. That was the first reason why the Alter Rebbe had this special merit. The second reason was the Maggid had a son called Rabbi Avram HaMalach. It's called Avram the angel. Why was he like an angel? Because he was a very spiritual person and lived an ascetic life, removed. Now, people who are extremely spiritual risk what can happen, like what happened to the 4 or 3 of the 4 that went into the orchard, or what happened to the sons of Aaron. When you experience a very deep spiritual, ecstatic experience, you can, what's called klei nefesh, your soul can depart. So the Maggid's son would learn with the Alter Rebbe, and once he reached this high state of higher consciousness, and he was about to expire. And that's when the Alter Rebbe gave him, sometimes it says a bagel with butter, and that's all called grounded him. Because he saved his life, the son of the Maggid's life, that was the second merit. So he concludes in that talk, he says, that's the role of the Alter Rebbe. To bring spiritual inspiration into this world is a great thing. Not everybody knows how to do that. But to bring it into this world and not annihilate, and not expire, and not remove yourself from this world, engage with it and transform it, that requires a far, far greater strength. So that was really what the Alter Rebbe accomplished. To take the most precious stone, not just save a life, but to actually develop a system that you can live in this material world and be as spiritual as one can possibly be, that's what the Alter Rebbe contributed. That's the gist of it. Now, I spoke about it more or less how it's said in that talk and that sikha. What does it mean in simple English? I mean, you look at different schools of thought, so to speak, thinkers and philosophers and mystics, all are faced with this challenge. Can you really live in a material world and engage with this world and also be and preserve your spiritual and moral integrity? So some say you can't. The only way is you have to live a monastic lifestyle. You move to the mountain, you move away from civilization, and that's conducive. You can't be in Wall Street and involved in the corruption and the deceit and the duplicity of this world and maintain spiritual integrity. And it's a big challenge, and the truth is, there's a big point to be made. There is another school of thought, which I don't really want to quote here, but there is the idea that what they call, Max Weber called the idea of the Protestant work ethic. That you live in this material world and be a virtuous person, but don't expect to reach any very high levels of spirituality. Even in Kabbalah, Chassidus cites a lot that this is a dilemma. If you get too close to God, can you really survive in this material world? If you stay too much in the material, then you really can't bring God into your life. And Chassidus really came to completely negate that paradox and says that's all based on a principle where matter and spirit are two worlds. But God, Hashem Echad, is beyond matter and spirit, beyond body and soul. So most of us would think, spirituality is closer to God than materialism is. The truth is, it's not necessarily the case. Why is God more spiritual than he is material? Not that God is matter, but I mean to say. So Chassidus explains in Alter Rebbe specifically that there's a third dimension that's neither physical nor spiritual, and when you connect to that, you can integrate the two. So just to give an example, the Alter Rebbe of Yud Tes Kislev had a chassid. His name was Binyamin Kletzker. I think the story is with him. I think so. So he was a businessman, as well as a big chassid. One day, he's making his calculations. I remember hearing the story from the Rebbe at Farbrengen, so I'm sharing it how I heard it. He's making his calculations, and so, a good business person has income and expenses. So the month of January, the month of Tishrei, this is the amount of income, amount of expenses. The month of Cheshvan, Kislev. Okay, and then comes, of course, the sum total at the end of the year. What do you write at the bottom? What's the total? So instead of writing a number, he wrote, Ein Eid Milvade. There's nothing but God. So I remember the Rebbe saying, almost incredulously, he said, what's going on here? If he's so consumed with God, so on every line he should have written expenses and income equals God. Expenses and income equals God. There he had the presence of mind to write the actual number. So the Rebbe then, I remember, smiled and said, because if he wrote God on every line, then he doesn't belong in business. He belongs in a kollel, or he belongs in a place where businessmen don't hang out. Because then he's not doing masa matan b'amunah. You run a business, you need to know, is it a profit, is there a loss, you owe money, you don't owe money. So he has to be grounded and understand the calculations. However, when it comes to the sum total, what's the purpose of it all, then it's not the money, it's not the numbers. Then it's all about God. And the Rebbe explained this, we're talking with these week's Parshas, which is always around Yud Tes Kislev, is the story of Yosef. Yosef was the first Jewish accountant. Did you know that? Yeah. The Targum says he was married to Chushbene after he was sold into slavery by his brothers. So he became the accountant by Potiphar. Then later he became more than an accountant. He rose and became a tycoon. The commodity of the time was not technology, it was grain. And he turned Egypt into a superpower. And he was the one that managed the whole grain industry then, which saved the world and as well as made Egypt, as I said, into a superpower. So Chassidus explains, Who was greater, Joseph or his father and grandfather and great-grandfather? Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or Joseph? They all began as shepherds. Joseph was a shepherd until he was 17. Why did they choose being shepherds? Because a shepherd, in a way, is like this ascetic lifestyle. He's not involved in the real business world. The sheep graze, and meanwhile, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they're able to meditate and contemplate and pray and commune with God. You know, when you're really immersed in business, you can't really concentrate like that. That's why they chose being shepherds. Joseph was also that way, until he was forced to go into the real business world. And here was the question: can he maintain his integrity? Because you would think, okay, he had no choice, and now he has to become a business person, and he can't reach the same lofty and spiritual heights like his parents did. But then when Yaakov heard after 22 years that Jacob remembered what Torah they learned when they separated 22 years earlier, he realized, on the contrary, Joseph was even greater. Because for someone who doesn't immerse in business and stays in a spiritual environment and studies Torah all day, it's beautiful, but they haven't faced the challenges of this world. Joseph faced those challenges and still he preserved the integrity. That meant that you could engage while also remaining above. And that's why in many ways Joseph is considered greater. It's literally what he says in this talk about the Alter Rebbe. So interesting, Chassidus Chabad on one hand is, if you learn Chassidus, you see it's a very profound, spiritual, mystical, highest level, sublime discussion. But its real purpose is actually to give us tools to engage with the world, not to separate from it. Which answers a big question. A lot of people wondered when the Rebbe became Rebbe and he started putting emphasis on going out, on shlichus. And we see activism became a very big factor in Chabad, where some even asked the question, one second, you look at the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab, their focus was this yeshiva temchet mimim, to educate students to become masters of understanding Chassidus and God, and davening for hours, and working on themselves, refining themselves. The focus was not really what we call today outreach. That's not really the right word, because that's not the word we use, but I mean to say activism. And here, you see, look around, and it seems like, at least ostensibly, most people look at that today, seems this is much more active. Chabad is activism. As I'll explain, it's not necessarily the case, but that's what it looks like. So you could answer Pekuach Nefesh, since it's life and death, and there's thousands, assimilation is ravaging the Jewish community. You know, when a building is burning, you can't just say, let's all go into Lubavitch and sit in yeshiva all day and ignore the burning building. So there's no question that's an answer. But that would be, okay, so therefore we have to compromise, so-called, the more, we'll call it the internal work that Chassidus demands, because the situation required, we're at war, so-called, with millions of Jews who don't know what Yiddishkeit is and Aleph Beis, whatever the reason may be. But that's still, so what does that mean? That all the 6 generations of Chassidus essentially are really, they're there for the books, and some individuals study them, but it's not really for most people, because we have to be involved in activism. And the answer, that's not correct. When the Rebbe created, so-called, and they can't say created, but developed and further expanded the idea of going into each community, it was not meant to be compromising that which is theirs, exactly like Yosef. That's what Chassidus always came to do. It always came to transform the world. There was a time where we transformed it by being in yeshiva and being more in environments that were more insulated. So it wasn't about, okay, we have to go out there and you can't have the best of both worlds. The point was to go and create actually Chassidic communities in every place where you transform that outer world with Chassidus. So I want to share this, in some ways it's a painful story, but it's also, I think, very illuminating. So you all heard of Newsweek magazine, right? Today it's not what it once was. Time and Newsweek. I happen to know the editor-in-chief of Newsweek before the internet changed everything. His name is John Meacham. How do I know him? Because he was once the religion editor, and he worked for another religion editor who had interviewed me once, so we became friendly. Now these are non-Jews, but extremely knowledgeable in Torah and Chassidus, actually. Some of them learned in JTS. Some of them were very knowledgeable and actually they love Jews. In contrast, like they told me that many of the Jews on their staff didn't like Jews. And every time they wanted to write an article about religion in America or faith, there's these few articles a year, it was the Jews that always opposed it. They said, oh, what kind of faith? And they kept telling these Jews, what do you think? Most of America are believers. They're not the East Coast and West Coast skeptics like you. Anyway, so one week, John Meacham, they published a cover story. It was called Spirituality in America. And so, you cover spirituality, the Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and Jewish. And who was the Jew? Who represented the Jewish? It was Zalman Schachter. Zalman Schachter, yes, of Chabad origins. But he has his own, what they call Jubus, or whatever you want to call it, Jewish renewal. Anyway, because I knew John Mitchum, I wrote him a memo, an email. And I said to him, of all people, that spirituality by Jews today is Chabad Chassidus. So why didn't you interview someone from Chabad Chassidim? And Schachter was not representing Chabad Chassidim, he was representing his own approach. So here's what he wrote back to me. I shared this, by the way, in a regional Kinus HaShluchim in the East Coast, the Northeast rather, which is a large Leni Shluchim. And he wrote back to me following words. He said, you and I know that Jewish spirituality is in Chabad Chassidus, but America doesn't know it, and the world doesn't know it, and I'm not your PR agent to make them know it. So you have your work cut out for you. And he wrote something further, which was very insightful. A really smart man, he knows the pulse. I mean, he's editor-in-chief of a magazine like that, that he knows something. He writes, Chabad in the world, those that know what Chabad is the Rebbe was a genius in social activism. That he built a Chabad house in every city, wherever you go, non-judgmental, you can go in Shabbat and be welcomed, love, unconditional. Beautiful. Outposts all over the world. But social activism is not a philosophy. It's not a way of life. It's like, there's also this Salvation Army he wrote. I'm just sensing that's what he wrote. And it so struck me that, he said it so well. And I unfortunately, of course, have to admit he's right. Not that that's true, but it's right in reality. That there's a tremendous misunderstanding. Most people, and I've met people, I remember, I was walking on Eastern Parkway and Brooklyn Avenue, and a Hasidic Jew, not a Chabad Chassid from Williamsburg, passes by and he says, where can he get a minyan for mincha? He wants to daven mincha. So I told him, down the block there's a place called 770. You have plenty of minyanim there. So this is what he says to me. He says, they daven there? So I said, what do you think? What else do they do? He said he thought it was a parking lot of mitzvah tanks. That's what that 770 is, a place that sends out mitzvah tanks. So it's like a recruit, like a fire department, like where there's fire engines.
Greyhound Depot.
Mitzvah garage. U-Haul. And he wasn't kidding. So I said to him, why don't you go there, check it out. You'll find not only davening, you'll find 700 bochurim sitting and learning. And it's a place of Torah. Well, my point is that, because from the outside, if you don't know better, you see the so-called, the outer, what do you see? You see activism. Now, just open up, without even reading any talk that the Rebbe delivered. And there's volumes. There's the original talks, the unedited versions, there's the edited versions, the Yud Tes Kislev, whatever you want. There's letters. And just look at it. Thousands of pages. And you're not going to find many words about activism. You're going to find profound analysis of a Rashi or a Rambam or a Zohar, and discussions and intricate details as Talmudic as it gets. And then at the end of every talk, yes, every talk at the end, the last page, 2 pages, the Hira B'chaim, with the lesson, and that's where the activism comes into play. So if you listen to a Farbrengen of the Rebbe, you're not going to hear a call to activism, you're going to hear profound Torah, and the conclusion is now do something with it, go act on it. Obviously, it doesn't remain academic. You look in Tanya, you tell me, go study Tanya. Tanya is meant to be a liquid of eitzes. So if you don't know what Tanya is, you open up, you think, I'm going to get a self-help book with a bunch of bullet points and advice, and that's it. Try it out. Read a chapter, read 5 lines. You have to break your head. The Alter Rebbe's brilliance. Obviously, his goal is to give the advice. But the best advice of all is coming from a scholar. Those self-help books that are psychobabble, they don't have that profound backdrop. I know this because when I wrote, for example, Torah Meaningful Life, to make it more palpable and so on, I had to take out only the directives. Because you go into all the analysis, the Rebbe would go into Zohar and every commentary and back and forth. It's not for most people are not going to read through it. It's valuable. But the beauty of it is, and this is where you see both worlds. On one hand, Chassidus is the most sublime, profound. I mean, you can compare it to the deepest mystical teaching you'll ever read anywhere. At the same time, there's that other side, that Yosef in Mitzrayim, with Alter Rebbe, the grounding, where he saved the Rabbi Avram Malach's life. Real activism. And that's a very hard thing to explain to people. Now, are all of us as shluchim living up to both? Obviously that we're not. And the fact is when you're involved in activism and you have to prepare Shabbos and you have to prepare Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen, very hard to be sitting and learning Samach Vov for 6 hours today when you have to prepare all of this. But maybe when you hire enough staff, you can do it. But that was what the Rebbe wanted. And yes, it is. When the Rebbe would say, when someone says, but how do you do both? So the Rebbe said, what's the big thing? Jews are nimnam nimnoyes. So what? Since when our paradoxes bother us? We're a people of paradox. So I feel that in Yud Tes Kislev, you see literally those 2 sides. There's the side of the depths and that whole like foundation. You don't see a foundation of a building. It's under the ground. And actually, when you see one, it doesn't look very nice. It's like, but it's without it, you don't have the building. When you see a building that has a strong foundation, you talk about the, and that's really what Chassidus is. It took Torah with all its depth, but ultimately to not just leave it up in Atzilus and the higher spiritual worlds, but comes down to a very real plan to deal with simple things, building a day school and dealing with little children, and dealing with, the Jews that may not have the background, at least not talk about knowledge background, and go step by step. The Rebbe once said about his father-in-law, the Friedrich Rebbe, the Mesiras Nefesh, he says, the Shver, that instead of teaching my Morim like Tzadik Daled and the deepest ideas of Chassidus, he's busy teaching olive base to children in America. Now that was not meant to be a negative, it was meant to say that the same person who's in that same deep place is also able to do things on a very basic level. I remember seeing so many times when we saw the Rebbe with children, he was like in his natural habitat. I always felt that like with adults, the Rebbe had to put on more brakes. With the children, it was just that natural purity and simplicity. And you could think with children, other Rebbe speaking to adults, that's where you see the Rebbe glow and shine, his brilliance, his teaching. No, but you actually saw it more in the things that seem like simple, but we know that nothing is simple. A little simple child that's playing around in the ground can be far more complex than all our machinations that we adults have. So the Alter Rebbe teaches that as well, the idea of both simplicity and complexity. And I think in the practical side of it, we really need to master both. It's not easy. And not like everybody's going to be both an excellent activist and excellent execution person, as well as the brains behind it. How's Malcolm Gladwell put it? He says there are minders, grinders, finders, and binders. And so, everybody has their role to play, but you need both. And the goal the Rebbe implemented was not only not a contradiction to the Alter Rebbe's approach, it was actually coming to fruition. The Rebbe said the seventh generation, taking everything from the way Chassidus was formed, even in its most sublime place, but to bring it into an actual blueprint that we could change this physical world. The Alter Rebbe and his students, I think, well, not the Alter Rebbe, but his students, they'd see us. I don't know if they'd relate to us, frankly, because they were living in that very spiritual place. But philosophically, they always understood that the goal is to come to a world like this. And I'll say this, just to conclude this piece here with a story. I remember it was in 1979. It was Shabbos Bereshis, Tov Shin Mem. I had just begun working then and writing the Sichos, talks of the Rebbe. So on Shabbos Bereshis, the custom was to sell the mitzvahs, which means for the year, like the Aliyahs and who's going to open the Ark, and different things they would sell. There was like a bidding war somewhat. And it was the only time the Rebbe was actually there, middle of Farbrengen. The Rebbe would be looking in his siddur or chumash, and there was the Rabbi would get up with a streimel and he would sell mitzvahs. You find in the synagogues usually done Simchas Torah or the next Shabbos. So that was Rabbi Pinson was the Rabbi, and he got up, and he always began with a story or with a Dvar Torah. So a story with the Alter Rebbe he told. Then a book called Migdal Oz from Rabbi Shua Munstein was published, and there's a story that goes like this. Yeah. Yeah, twice a year. That was Bereshis and Mishpatim for the Gemach. Goldman before that, Yechen and Gordon, yeah. Anyway, the story goes like this. In the time of the Alter Rebbe, approximately 200 and whatever years ago, 30 years ago, whatever, 224 years ago, Yud Tes Kislev. So the first maps, navigational maps, were being drawn because there was already travel to the New World. So the navigators, the people who traveled, they didn't have satellite images. So based on their travels, they would map out the borders, like of the East Coast in the United States or other places. So there were maps. We have maps, primitive maps relatively, but not pretty accurate in most cases. And the Alter Rebbe was shown a map of America, of all things. So, okay. This is probably the only time we have the Alter Rebbe talking about America. I mean, there's another place where he talks about why in America they don't fall off the world, but that's another...
His son came here.
Huh?
His son came here.
Moshe? The Alter Rebbe's son? No, not the Alter Rebbe.
One is buried in South Africa.
I'm not sure. That's not...
He met with the U.S. president.
Okay, maybe. I know that. But anyway, the Alter Rebbe was shown a map of America. And the Alter Rebbe looked at it and said, there's a mistake in the map. So they said to the Alter Rebbe, what do you mean? How do you know there's a mistake? Well, you were there? How would he know? So, of course, the answer is, I don't think he answered, but the Chassidim answered, because Istakel bar Raisa bar Alma, the whole world was created. God looked in the Torah and he created the world. So Alter Rebbe looked in the Torah and he saw the map was not aligned with the way he saw, I guess, America. That's the story. Now, the Rebbe rarely reacted when these Gaboim would speak, but here, the rare times, the Rebbe did not pick up his head. He was looking in a sefer, and while he was looking, so no one expected the Rebbe to say anything, but not everyone even heard it. And the Rebbe said the following words. He says, "And the ikar is the America is that the main thing is that when we come to America, you shouldn't make a mistake." So we put it. It's published. If you look in that Bereshis Tov Shemem, you'll find that line. So I remember we were Farbrengen at the time. What does that mean? What does the Rebbe mean? So most likely the meaning is that the Alter Rebbe was seeing it from the top, from above, and he saw that the map of America is not aligned the way God wanted it to be. But that's the Alter Rebbe's eyes. We, when we come to America, to make sure that America should be aligned with what God wants. The Ikar in America is on Mishmach and Kintas. So you probably all know the story where the Alter Rebbe was opposed in the Russo-Franco War. So there was the two opinions, who should win the war, Napoleon of France or Alexander of Russia. So there were rabbis who felt Napoleon wins, it'll be easier and alleviate some of the oppression and the difficult life of poverty of the Jews, because Napoleon promised freedom, fraternity, and so on. The Alter Rebbe was of the opinion, no, that under Alexander will be more difficult materially, but spiritually would be better, because also Napoleon was a godless society. And so it's a long story. Bottom line, Rosh Hashanah that year, the Alter Rebbe woke up early and he blew shofar and he prevailed. So Alexander won. But then in 1992, Shabbos Pasha Vayeshev, actually this week, 92 would be where are we now? That's 31 years ago?
30.
Yeah, Nun Beis, and now it's Pei Gimel, so 31.
92?
Well, maybe it was 91, maybe the end of 91, December. Well, it was Nun Beis, Pei Gimel. Okay, and the Rebbe said something, I mean, very rare, but he said that was the time of the Alter Rebbe, because the Jews were not ready yet to go into an emancipated world. Remember, look, even with the Alexander winning, look what assimilation did. Imagine had the modern world come too early, it would have been even more devastating. But now, after 7 generations, we have the ability to go into the Western world, into France, and into the Western world, and even though there was a godless element to it, and bring God there. I mean, that's the gist of it. The Rebbe spoke about why he taught the song, the Marseille. Marseille is the song we sing, Haderes V'Amuna, is a French anthem. The French anthem is, if you know the words and the tune, it's a very violent and very non-godly song. But the Rebbe said that because Chassidim transformed it. They drew out, so the Alter Rebbe, huh?
The Rebbe transformed it.
Yeah, but he said Chassidim. Yeah, obviously. But my point is, you mamish see the story that I said before, that the Chassidus did not come to compromise Torah, it came to bring Torah to places that early generations, we couldn't be there. Just like Yaakov couldn't live side by side with Esav until Mashiach comes. So the same idea. So the activism, so to speak, of Chabad in transforming the world is part and parcel. It's a pure extension of the deepest levels that Chassidus teaches. It's not two different worlds. There was a Chassid, Solner Belenitsky, what was his son's name? Aaron Yosef Belenitsky. So he was by the Rebbe in the early years, in 1951, 52, and he asked the Rebbe, was there any change regarding the attitude to our Avedus Atfilah? Meaning, Chassidim used to daven many hours. And some felt the impression was that by the Rebbe was not the emphasis. So he asked whether there's a change about how we daven. And the Rebbe said, nothing changed. So, Garnish Gebet, nothing changed. The Rebbe said, no, so Garnish Gebet. The next year he came again for Tishrei, and the Rebbe asked him this time, Nu was hetzog mit Avedus Atfilah badir? So he says, Garnish Gebet. Meaning that he didn't daven before, he still doesn't. I mean, he just used the Rebbe's words, but the point being is that these are not a contradiction. These are two parts of the same idea, and you see it throughout history. You see it especially that you really want to achieve both. It's very clear. And that Psicha Vayeshev, 1992, was it 91? Close to 92, the end of... the Rebbe said there clearly that the goal was, in building Chabad houses, and building Chabad all over the world, that each place should become a Mokum Teda and a Mokum Tefillah, just like Lubavitch. In other words, it wasn't about just bringing it out there, but actually to transform and turn every community into a place that has the deepest levels of learning and davening and so on. It wasn't just for activism. So I think the lesson to us all is that there is a need to combine the two, and at the end of the day, our mission is, yes, to bring Judaism and bring Torah and mitzvahs to every person we can reach. But there's something more than that. We're also bringing God to people. It's not just the mechanics. Bringing God, and you bring God through Chassidus. The Chassidus talks about God. There are many people who can keep Shabbos and eat kosher, and forget there's a God. Or they say people who eat kosher, but they're not kosher. They keep Shabbos, but they're not Shabbosdik. You can sit Shabbos and not do exactly everything by the letter of the law, but do you feel uplifted? Do you feel sublime? Do you feel... And that's where Chassidus comes, as I said much earlier tonight. The wings, it has the wings, the inner passion and dimension that has transformative power. That's really key to everything. The Talmud says there's a ganav before he goes to steal, he prays to God to succeed. Like the story they tell about Yankel the pickpocket. You heard that one? So Yankel was a ganav, Yankel, one of the shtetls. He was a known pickpocket. He was a master. You could take anybody's wallet and they wouldn't know. One day, Yankel comes to the rabbi, the Rav, and with a wallet, a wad full of money, a wallet, he says, Rabbi, I want to be B'kayim the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. I found the wallet in the street, and I'm bringing it back. The rabbi is quite surprised, because here, there was no simanim, there was no signs. In other words, it's not like he can identify who it belongs to, and according to Jewish law, you can't identify it, you basically can keep it. And that's not theft. So, so he was quite surprised that this Ganef, of all people, is, and he looked, and the wallet was filled with money, didn't take one penny. Okay, very nice. So maybe he thinks Yankel did tshuva, So Yankel leaves the room. The rabbi starts looking around and suddenly feels his pockets. His wallet is missing. So he calls Yankel back. He says, 1 second, I don't understand. You could have taken this wallet. Why do you feel you have to steal my wallet? He says, Rabbi, business is business and a mitzvah is a mitzvah. Okay, so this is called dissonance. We call this dissonance. And we're all guilty of it as much as we laugh. Everybody has their moments. You can believe in God completely, but you really feel 24/7 God is mamish like watching you. And then you wouldn't do one thing wrong. So there's a dissonance. And you can blame a little God on it because God did conceal himself quite well. So as much as you believe, there's always that opportunity. I believe. I remember the Rebbe once edited one of the talks that we prepared, and he wrote, Einay Mulvade, B'seichel, Aval B'hargosha, we don't feel it. In the mind, we understand God is everywhere. But feeling is a whole other story. The fact of the matter is, even the biggest believers are not perfect human beings. Am I wrong? Rabbi Moshe?
People would say such.
So Chassidus explains because Amunah is makif. It's not that the guy is not a hypocrite or a liar or faking it. Faith can be existent, but it's not internalized. This is a big theme in Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe very much, that was what he came to show, that you could internalize it. But you could only internalize it if you think about it. If you just go by rote, mechanically, there's a God. It's very easy to say there's a God, I believe in God, I put on tefillin, I'll keep kosher, I'll do everything. But then when push comes to shove, and you're somewhere in an area it touches you in the pupik, as they say, something that subjectively your interest, and suddenly God is like the guy, the two kids walking by in the lunchroom, and there were apples and cake, and they were said, take one apple and one piece of cake. So one kid took 2 apples. So the teacher says, God is watching. And then he sees his friend. He takes 2 pieces of cake. So he says, how can you take? He says, because God's watching the apples, not watching the cake. So we all have moments where, God, and then it's for convenient purposes. So I'm not saying this as a critique. We're all in the same boat. But what Chassidus came to do was to eliminate this dissonance that it permeates. Now, I'm saying it and I'm holding by what I'm saying, but at the same time, it's still a challenge. But at least talking about it is also something. At least, we, as they say, Yedias Hamachla Chetzer Refuah. Knowing the problem is have the cure. So, my friend, bottom line is this. The Alter Rebbe, we were told, was a walking transparent channel of godliness. On Friday afternoon, he would fall asleep, not because he was tired, but because in heaven, that's a time of spiritual slumber. Rab Hillel, the great chassid, would lie down because he knew that. They said it in books, but he didn't feel it. So you're talking about a man, huh?
Did that also a mincha of Shabbos sometime?
Yeah, we saw that. Yeah. So we're talking about people who lived They were completely aligned with the divine on this earth. So we're not on that level, but we talk about it and we farbring about it and we tell the story. And it gives us at least a sense of a reality that may not be exactly like our own, but when you know something, there's a sikha, I talked about it last night more, but Rabbi Rashab in Torah Shalom, Rabbi Rashab speaks about a very deep sikha. He talks about yichud. It's one of those very profound Hasidic delivery talks where it's hard to follow, let's put it this way. And you could see at the end, the Rebbe Rashab senses that it was very deep. So he says at the end, why do we talk about such deep things? This is what he says. He says, in other words, sometimes you read about things that are beyond you, so you may not understand it all, but when you know what you're dealing with, you have a different measure of respect. It's like, someone will ask you, how vast is the universe? So if you're sitting in a valley, what are you going to say about the horizon? You climb up on a plateau, you say, I see more. You climb up 20 feet in a mountain. You go up to the top of Mount Everest, or you go up to the moon, you suddenly see, you ask the astronauts, you suddenly see the awesomeness of how big things are. That doesn't mean we master it, but it gives you a sense. When you learn Chassidus, you may not always master all the high levels, but you sense, oh, you know what, you're not there yet. Don't convince yourself you've already reached, you start seeing something that's, you have a different derech. Some people, God, yeah, he's smarter than me, that I agree. But, but there's still something in common between us. But you learn Chassidus, you start reading, one second, there's things that are, and actually that makes you greater. It's not meant to demoralize us or to make us feel weaker. It's like seeing greatness. When you see greatness, it elevates you. It lifts you up. So l'chaim, everyone. Not l'chaim, I don't know, whatever. Yud Tes Kislev, the Rebbe said, whoever celebrates this day, he will take us out from our abyss, from all the challenges and all the darkness and whatever challenge we may experience. Everyone should be gebenched with Bona Chaim Mezeinu Revicha, healthy children and healthy nachas, abundance materially, spiritually. The Alter Rebbe said God should give you a lot of gashmias, matter, and make from matter spirit, ruchnis. And all good health, arichas yom v'shalom tevas, whatever your heart's desires, all the teva, nida, v'nigla, reveal, l'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim.
I want to just sing a niggin that actually quotes Alter Rebbe. It's very uncommon to sing by Farbrengen. That's a gorgeous, gorgeous niggin. It's niggin to make this Chabad L'Tfil Shabbos. And Ari never heard of it before.
Is it still going?
Here we go.
No, it's still live.
No, this is not live.
Go big. I'll go.
It's still going.
It is? Is this still going? Still going? Oh.
It was the great grandson.
Huh?
It was the great grandson of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Chaim Tzvi. He was the first one to meet when he was president in the White House, Ulysses Grant.
Who was his father?
You want to read it? This doesn't have Shol Sayachas, but there's a whole chira about the story. He's buried in South Africa. Cape Town. He was the Rebbe.
Whose son was he?
I'm not sure. I have it on a voice note from a fellow shliach who did the he was raising funds in South Africa. He was sick and he died. So they buried him in Cape Town.
He showed me a book about from the Tsars and the strife between Alexander and Napoleon. He describes basically how he was
one decisive battle that really turned everything around. And on 1812 it was called the Battle of Bardinos or something like that. And he says this was. So afterwards he looked up at the calendar and there was the first day Rosh Hashanah Tav Kufayim. It was Rosh Hashanah Tav Kufayim.
Ayin Gimel?
What?
Ayin Gimel?
Yeah. That exact thing.
Interesting.
There's a voice note I have which has all the Shalshal Zayachas.
So when did you say you'd be here? So when did we say?
However long you want it for.
Huh?
However long you want it for.
It depends on the people. I'm here. Meanwhile, keep it. Yeah, let's keep it for a little while. We'll see shortly. What time is it? 11:15 already.
Somebody wanted you to have this car. Somebody in the community.
Base Gimple on New York Avenue. Sing enough. Yeah, sing it.
Are you late? Maybe sing a song everybody knows.
About stories of being a chayzer.
Read a distance.
Hear stories about
Read a
that?
distance.
Of course, I have stories. I have many stories.
Just remind me.
They're asking me. I think we could probably end it now. No? Wait after this song. Yeah, l'chaim, l'chaim. Still on?